we trust our partners to protect us from the world. But what happens when the world needs to protect us from our partners? When tragedy repeats itself with mathematical precision, the mask of the grieving widower begins to fail. How many times can a name appear in a death investigation before we recognize the face of a predator? The scorching desert wind rattled the windows of a quiet Las Vegas home on a Tuesday evening in May 2008. Inside the shadowed hallway, the silence broke with the deafening crack of a firearm. Police cruisers swarmed the cul-de-sac, their red and blue lights flashing against the pale stucco walls. Officers drew their weapons and breached the front door, stepping into a scene of chilling, calculated destruction. A woman lay lifeless on the carpet, her future stolen in a chaotic alleged home invasion. A few feet away rested the body of an unidentified masked intruder. Standing amidst the devastation was a gray-haired man gripping a weapon and claiming he had just saved his own life. Thomas Randolph looked the officers in the eyes and presented himself as a grieving, heroic husband. Yet, the pristine geometry of the scene whispered a much darker, far more sinister narrative. Sharon Cause was a woman who radiated warmth and optimism. She spent her days tending to her garden and building a quiet, comfortable life in the sun-drenched neighborhoods of Nevada. Sharon possessed a trusting nature and always looked for the best in the people around her. Her friends described her as an anchor of kindness who dreamed of a peaceful retirement filled with laughter and companionship. She spent years searching for genuine partnership, enduring the trials of life with grace and a hopeful heart. When she met Thomas Randolph, he appeared as the charming, attentive companion she had always desired. He carried an air of quirky confidence that masked the deep voids in his past. Sharon believed she had finally secured her happily ever after, blind to the shadows trailing her new husband. She welcomed him into her home, trusting him with her finances, her secrets, and her future. The Las Vegas suburb where they settled was a grid of identical houses, palm trees, and manicured lawns, offering a perfect facade of domestic tranquility. Behind the closed blinds of their shared residence, Thomas Randolph played the role of an eccentric but devoted spouse. He was a man who possessed a magnetic, almost chaotic charisma, winning over neighbors with loud jokes and wide smiles. Beneath this constructed public persona lay a sprawling, multi-state history obscured by jurisdictional boundaries and paper files. Randolph had spent the previous 4 decades drifting across state lines, leaving behind a complex web of brief marriages and abrupt departures. He understood precise methods to exploit the disconnected record-keeping systems of the late 20th century. Law enforcement agencies in different states rarely shared civilian marital histories without a specific warrant, providing Randolph an endless canvas for his deception. To the outside world, he was simply an unlucky romantic who experienced more than his fair share of marital tragedy. Nobody in Sharon's orbit knew that Thomas Randolph was currently entering his 6th marriage. In the immediate aftermath of the May 2008 emergency call, detectives began cataloging the items scattered across the Las Vegas floor plan. The official narrative presented by Randolph detailed a random, violent burglary that spiraled into a fatal confrontation. He claimed he stepped out of the room, heard the devastating struggle, and returned just in time to neutralize the threat. However, routine background checks surfaced a glaring, heavily documented financial motive. Investigators obtained subpoenas for the couple's financial records, poring over stacks of banking statements and insurance policies. The paperwork revealed that Randolph stood as the sole beneficiary of over $360,000 in life insurance policies linked to Sharon. The ink on several documents was fresh, outlining a fortune that would transfer to Randolph upon her untimely end. This immense financial windfall shifted the focus of the detectives from a random break-in to an orchestrated elimination. The puzzle pieces of the chaotic home invasion began to align into a rigid, profitable structure. The investigation demanded absolute clarity regarding the masked intruder lying deceased in the hallway. Crime scene technicians processed the physical evidence, lifting fingerprints from the intruder and running them through the national database. The return matched the prints to a man named Michael Miller. Miller was not an anonymous drifter looking for a quick score in a wealthy neighborhood. Detectives traced Miller's employment history and discovered he was a handyman who worked direct jobs for Thomas Randolph. The physical distance between the two bodies and the angles of the projectile trajectories did not match a spontaneous struggle. Instead, the spatial mapping suggested a deliberate staging, where individuals were positioned with precise deadly intent. The revelation that the heroic husband personally employed the deceased intruder shattered the entire foundation of the home invasion theory. Detectives realized they were hunting a predator who treated human lives as disposable pawns in a twisted financial game. The identification of Michael Miller prompted Las Vegas investigators to cast a massive dragnet over Thomas Randolph's entire chronological history. They filed interstate requests for any police reports involving his previous 5 wives, diving deep into the dusty archives of rural jurisdictions. Within days, a sprawling file from Utah arrived on the desks of the Nevada detectives, detailing the tragic end of Randolph's second wife, Becky Galt. In 1986, authorities found Becky deceased from a fatal wound in a staged self-inflicted scenario. Much like the current case, Randolph was the sole individual present during her final moments. Also mirroring the Nevada tragedy, Randolph collected a staggering life insurance payout immediately following Becky's demise. Utah prosecutors had taken Randolph to trial in 1988, presenting evidence of a troubled marriage and a clear financial motive. He sat through the court proceedings wearing his trademark eccentric outfits, projecting absolute confidence to the jury. During the 1988 trial, the prosecution encountered a massive legal roadblock regarding witness testimony. A crucial associate of Randolph had previously confessed to a complex plot, claiming Randolph asked him to eliminate Becky. Defense attorneys dismantled this testimony, utilizing legal loopholes to cast doubt on the associate's reliability. The strict evidentiary rules of the era restricted the jury from hearing a complete, unfiltered psychological profile of the defendant, without irrefutable physical proof tying the weapon to Randolph's hands. The defense team argued reasonable doubt and won. The jury returned a verdict of not guilty, releasing Randolph back into society with a massive insurance payout in his bank account. This systemic failure emboldened Randolph, teaching him that the legal system could be manipulated through staged scenes and silenced witnesses. He walked away from Utah with an undeniable blueprint for accumulating wealth through tragedy. Las Vegas detectives stared at the files, realizing the legal system had unknowingly funded a serial widower. Armed with the knowledge of the 1986 tragedy, Las Vegas detectives reconstructed the timeline leading up to Sharon's final day. They physically mapped the distance between Randolph's residence and Michael Miller's usual locations, securing surveillance footage from surrounding businesses. Investigators spent specific, documented weeks interviewing the neighbors, asking for details about any arguments, strange visitors, or unusual vehicles parked in the cul-de-sac. They tracked the cell phone pings of both Randolph and Miller, establishing a digital trail of constant communication in the days preceding the event. The telecommunication records demonstrated a clear pattern of coordination, dismantling the idea of a random, unprovoked break-in. Detectives then turned their attention to the surviving former wives of Thomas Randolph, flying across the country to conduct in-person interviews. These women sat in sterile interview rooms, recounting chilling tales of a man who demanded absolute control over their lives. They detailed his obsession with life insurance, his explosive temper, and his terrifying habit of keeping weapons in every room of the house. The forensic analysts in Nevada operated with caution, determined not to repeat the mistakes of the 1988 Utah trial. They utilized modern ballistic testing, examining the exact distance the firearm was held from Michael Miller's body. The stippling patterns on Miller's clothing indicated a close range. Execution style, discharge, contradicting Randolph's story of a distant shootout. Detectives matched this physical evidence against the audio recording of Randolph's emergency dispatch call, analyzing his vocal fluctuations and background noises. The dispatch audio lacked the genuine panic of a victim, sounding instead like a rehearsed theatrical performance. Every single forensic data point reinforced the theory of a deadly choreography designed to generate a $360,000 payout. The investigators compiled massive binders of evidence demonstrating how Randolph exploited jurisdictional divides to reset his life over and over again. They submitted these exhaustive findings to the Clark County District Attorney, officially requesting a grand jury indictment. The legal machinery moved with deliberate caution as prosecutors prepared to present a case spanning multiple decades. The defense attorneys for Randolph filed countless motions to suppress the introduction of the Utah tragedy, arguing it would prejudice the Nevada jury. Judges spent countless hours reviewing the intricate legal precedents regarding prior bad acts, weighing the probative value against potential bias. The court eventually ruled that the striking similarities between the two incidents demonstrated a clear, undeniable pattern of financial extraction. Investigators continued refining their witness list, preparing the surviving wives to face their former tormentor in a public courtroom. They rehearsed the presentation of the cell phone data, ensuring the complex digital mapping would be easily understood by lay people. Randolph remained behind bars during this extensive pretrial phase, his charm finally failing against the relentless pressure of empirical evidence. The illusion of the heroic husband had dissolved, leaving only the cold reality of a calculating predator awaiting judgment. The trial commenced in 2017. The courtroom air felt heavy and stagnant. Thomas Randolph sat at the defense table. He wore oversized glasses and a fading arrogance. The prosecution launched their offensive. They laid out the exact sequence of events from May 2008. Randolph sought a massive payout. He lacked the courage to act alone. He hired his own handyman and promised Michael Miller a share of the impending wealth. The plan required precision and cold execution. Miller entered the home to eliminate Sharon. Randolph waited in the shadows. He allowed the brutal act to conclude. Then the trap snapped shut on Miller. The predator stepped out of the darkness. Randolph raised his weapon. He aimed directly at his hired accomplice. He pulled the trigger. Miller fell lifeless to the floor. The sole witness was silenced forever. Randolph picked up the telephone. He dialed the emergency dispatch line. He began his rehearsed performance. The jury watched the prosecution connect the dots. They saw the crime scene photographs. They heard the staggering financial figures. The pattern was undeniable. Randolph staged the entire horrific play. He controlled every entrance and every exit. He wore the mask of a victim while holding the smoking weapon. The jury retreated to the deliberation room, taking only days to process the sheer volume of overwhelming evidence. They returned a definitive verdict finding Thomas Randolph guilty of 2 counts of first-degree taking of a human life. The court recognized the immense severity of his calculated actions and handed down a sentence of death. For a brief moment, it appeared that the sprawling, multi-state terror campaign had reached an unbreakable conclusion. However, the complex nature of the American legal system provided one last avenue for the cunning predator to exploit. The Nevada Supreme Court reviewed the trial transcripts and identified a critical legal error regarding the admission of the Utah evidence. The appellate judges ruled that the jury had been prejudiced by the extensive focus on the 1986 tragedy. They overturned the conviction, forcing the shattered families to brace themselves for another grueling journey through the justice system. The pursuit of justice resumed in 2023 during an emotionally exhausting retrial. Prosecutors adjusted their strategy, focusing heavily on the irrefutable forensic evidence and the devastating financial paper trail left in Nevada. The new jury observed the same chilling cell phone data, the identical ballistic reports, and the undeniable connection between Randolph and his deceased handyman. They saw through the aging defendant's persistent claims of victimhood and his desperate attempts to blame the shadows of a random home invasion. In August 2023, the jury once again delivered a guilty verdict, refusing to let the serial widower walk free. In April 2024, the judge officially sentenced Thomas Randolph to 60 years to life behind the high concrete walls of a state penitentiary. The gavel strike cemented his permanent removal from society, ensuring no other hopeful woman would ever fall into his deadly financial traps. Yet, as the prison doors locked behind Thomas Randolph, a similar darkness was already brewing in a quiet Chicago suburb, where a police sergeant's wife named Stacy Peterson vanished into the cold October night. In late October of the year 2007, the quiet streets of Bolingbrook, Illinois became the center of a chilling national spectacle. 23-year-old Stacy Peterson vanished from her home, leaving her young children behind and her police sergeant husband offering nothing but casual dismissals. But as investigators began tearing apart the timeline of her sudden disappearance, they stumbled upon an older, far more sinister anomaly resting quietly in the archives. 3 years prior, another wife of the very same police officer had met a grim permanent end under wildly suspicious circumstances. The search for a missing young mother was about to shatter a carefully constructed facade and expose a predator hiding behind a badge. Bolingbrook sits 30 miles southwest of Chicago, characterized by winding subdivisions, manicured lawns, and a dense canopy of oak trees lining the residential avenues. In the early 2000s, Kathleen Savio called one of these quiet split-level houses her home. She was a deeply dedicated mother to her 2 sons, managing the chaotic daily routine of school runs and household chores with tireless devotion. Friends knew Kathleen as vibrant and fierce, a woman who meticulously maintained her garden and dreamed of completing her accounting degree. Her life revolved around providing stability for her boys, baking in her brightly lit kitchen, and organizing neighborhood gatherings. However, behind the closed doors of her comfortable suburban residence, a heavy cloud of psychological dread dominated her daily existence. Kathleen was navigating a profoundly hostile divorce from her husband, a man who wielded immense power both inside their home and across the entire town. Drew Peterson held the rank of sergeant with the Bolingbrook Police Department, a position he used as a shield against any outside scrutiny. He projected an image of absolute authority, walking the streets of his jurisdiction with a confident, arrogant swagger that demanded unquestioning respect from his peers. While Kathleen fought desperately for custody of their children and a fair financial settlement, Drew systematically dismantled her sense of safety. He utilized his knowledge of law enforcement tactics to monitor her movements, cornering her in her own home and issuing dark warnings about her future. Amidst this toxic separation, Drew turned his attention to a 19-year-old hotel clerk named Stacy. Stacy was young, trusting, and easily swept up by the intense attention of an older established authority figure. She believed his charming promises, entirely unaware of the suffocating control that awaited her. By the time Stacy married Drew and moved into his heavily secured home, Kathleen was desperately preparing for a final divorce hearing that she hoped would finally set her free. The facade of normalcy completely shattered on Sunday, October 28, 2007. Early that morning, Stacy Peterson failed to arrive at a planned painting session at her sister's house, a minor deviation that immediately triggered massive alarm bells for her family. Stacy meticulously planned her days around her children, and abandoning them without a word defied every known pattern of her deeply ingrained maternal routine. Worried relatives rushed to the Peterson home, a rigid two-story structure guarded by heavy locks and an imposing security system. Inside, Drew Peterson offered a relaxed, almost bored explanation, claiming Stacy had packed her bags, taken tens of thousands of dollars, and vanished with another man. His dismissive tone sharply contrasted with the frantic panic of Stacy's sister, who immediately filed a formal missing persons report with the local authorities. The initial police response was agonizingly slow, hindered by an unspoken fraternal code that made patrol officers deeply hesitant to aggressively question a veteran sergeant. As Stacy's desperate family launched their own ground searches through the damp autumn woods of Will County, the glaring spotlight of the media forced a wider lens onto Drew Peterson. Journalists and outside investigators began connecting the current disappearance to a deeply unsettling event from March 2004. Just weeks before her final financial settlement with Drew, Kathleen Savio was discovered lifeless in the master bathroom of her Bolingbrook home. First responders found her in a dry bathtub, her hair soaked with water, bearing a deep gash on her scalp. The local police department, investigating one of their own, conducted a stunningly brief and shallow inquiry into the scene. They bypassed standard forensic protocols, ignored the lack of water in the tub, and accepted Docru's flimsy alibi without serious challenge. A coroner quickly ruled the tragedy an accidental drowning, allowing a dangerous man to walk away with total custody, financial windfalls, and zero accountability. This catastrophic systemic failure left a predator emboldened, setting the stage for Stacy to vanish 3 years later. In early November 2007, massive public outrage forced the Illinois State Police to take over the investigation from the compromised local department. Detectives descended upon the Peterson residence, executing search warrants and hauling away vehicles, computers, and financial records, while search dogs scored nearby canals and state parks for any sign of Stacy. Drew embarked on a bizarre, highly publicized media tour. He mocked the authorities, joked with reporters on his driveway, and displayed an arrogant confidence that he had outsmarted the entire justice system. Investigators, hitting a brick wall in their physical search for Stacy, pivoted their strategy toward the glaring errors of the past. Will County prosecutors realized that bringing down this untouchable sergeant required breaking the seal on Kathleen Savio's highly suspicious demise. They formally petitioned the court to exhume Kathleen's remains, arguing that the original 2004 investigation was a masterclass in law enforcement incompetence. A judge granted the order, setting a monumental forensic undertaking into motion. On November 13, 2007, forensic specialists gathered at a quiet local cemetery under a heavy, overcast sky. Workers carefully raised the burial vault from the cold earth, transporting the remains to a secure, brightly lit medical examiner facility in Chicago. Dr. Michael Boddy, a highly renowned forensic pathologist, conducted a grueling, meticulous second autopsy. He examined the severe laceration on the back of Kathleen's head, noting that the injury pattern did not match a simple, accidental slip. He identified deep bruising on her anterior torso, scraping on her limbs, and a pattern of trauma consistent with a violent physical struggle. The forensic evidence clearly indicated that someone had forcefully held Kathleen underwater, waited for her to stop moving, and then drained the tub. Following this undeniable medical breakthrough, the coroner officially reclassified the manner of death from an accident to a homicide. The state finally had a crime to prosecute, but they faced a towering legal barrier constructed by the perpetrator himself. Drew Peterson possessed a deep tactical understanding of the criminal justice system, knowing exactly how to exploit the rigid rules of evidence. Because Kathleen was gone and Stacy remained missing, There were no living witnesses to testify against him in a court of law. Detectives hit a massive procedural dead end, as the standard hearsay rule strictly prevented them from using the victim's previous statements to friends or pastors. Realizing this absurd legal loophole allowed perpetrators to silence their victims and then hide behind the rules of evidence, lawmakers took radical action. Throughout 2008, legislators in Illinois drafted and passed a groundbreaking statute specifically tailored to this exact type of injustice. Officially titled the Hearsay Exception Law, but widely known as Drew's Law. This legislation allowed judges to admit statements made by a victim if prosecutors could prove the defendant eliminated them to prevent their testimony. This systemic correction gave detectives the vital tool they needed to weave together the testimonies of those who had heard the victim's desperate cries for help. Armed with this new legal framework, prosecutors spent the entirety of 2008 and early 2009 building a meticulous, circumstantial case. Investigators conducted hundreds of interviews, tracking down Kathleen's former neighbors, divorce attorneys, and family members to document the history of domestic terror. They carefully recorded statements from Stacy's pastor, who confirmed Stacy had provided him with a dark, terrifying secret regarding Dardo's actions on the night Kathleen died. Detectives mapped out the timeline of March 2004, proving Drew had the opportunity, the motive, and the specialized knowledge to stage a crime scene. In May 2009, a grand jury reviewed this mountain of circumstantial and forensic evidence, finally issuing a formal indictment. Heavily armed state police officers intercepted Drew on a suburban street, placed him in handcuffs, and transported him to the Will County Jail. For the next 3 years, defense attorneys filed endless pretrial motions, fighting bitterly to block the hearsay evidence and delay the final reckoning. In July 2012, the grueling trial finally commenced inside the heavy oak-paneled courtroom of the Will County Courthouse. The atmosphere was incredibly tense. The prosecution launched their aggressive assault. They presented the newly discovered forensic pathology. They highlighted the impossible physics of a dry bathtub drowning. They demonstrated how a trained officer manipulates a local crime scene to his advantage. Witnesses took the stand, recounting Kathleen's absolute terror. They described her specific warnings that Drew would make her final moments look like a tragic accident. The defense pushed back hard, attacking the credibility of the new laws. They insisted the original local police investigation was completely flawless. The climax of the legal battle centered entirely on the profound betrayal of the badge. The state meticulously outlined the perpetrator's arrogant mindset. He believed his uniform made him completely untouchable. He believed his victims were entirely powerless. The jury absorbed the chilling reality of his calculated deception. They saw through the smug demeanor he maintained at the defense table. On September 6, 2012, the courtroom fell completely silent. The judge read the final verdict. The jury found the former sergeant guilty of taking Kathleen Savio's life. The arrogant facade instantly collapsed. The judicial system delivered a crushing final blow to the disgraced officer. The presiding judge sentenced Drew Peterson to 38 years in a maximum security penitentiary for his actions against Kathleen. His dangerous hubris followed him behind bars, leading to a sprawling secondary investigation. Authorities uncovered a detailed plot orchestrated by the former sergeant from his cell. He attempted to hire a hitman to eliminate the lead prosecutor who had secured his conviction. This arrogant conspiracy resulted in a subsequent trial and an additional 40-year prison sentence. He will never again walk free to intimidate or harm another individual. The specific failures of the local police department initiated widespread reforms in how domestic cases involving officers are handled. Despite the immense satisfaction of achieving long-delayed justice for Kathleen Savio, a profound shadow continues to loom over this case. Stacy Peterson remains missing, her official file sitting open and unsolved in the archives of the state police. Her family tirelessly maintains their search, hoping to one day bring her home and provide her children with a definitive answer. The legacy of these two women serves as a dark reminder of the hidden dangers lurking behind pristine suburban doors. The facade of a perfect marriage often conceals terrifying realities, a theme that echoes far beyond the borders of Illinois. Such deceptions are not isolated to quiet neighborhoods in the Midwest. In September 2012, a frantic emergency call echoed out from the rugged, remote terrain of Rocky Mountain National Park. A husband reported a tragic anniversary hiking accident, bringing authorities face to face with yet another web of deadly contradictions. September 29, 2012, Rocky Mountain National Park, Colorado. The autumn air holds a sharp chill as the dispatcher answers a frantic 911 call. On the line is Harold Henthorne, out of breath, stating his wife Toni has just plummeted from a steep 130-foot cliff during their 12th wedding anniversary hike. When emergency rescue teams navigate the treacherous, loose gravel trails to reach the remote wilderness of Deer Mountain, they find Toni unresponsive at the base of the massive granite wall. But as park rangers begin securing the area, they notice something deeply unsettling about the grieving husband. Harold is completely uninjured, strangely calm under the circumstances, and repeatedly changes the sequence of events leading up to his wife's catastrophic plunge. Toni Bretolette Henthorne lived a life defined by dedication, intellect, and profound compassion. Raised in a close-knit, prominent family in Jackson, Mississippi, she pursued a demanding career in medicine, eventually becoming a highly respected and financially successful ophthalmologist. Colleagues and patients alike admired her gentle bedside manner and her tireless work ethic. Despite her professional accolades, her true center of gravity was her young daughter, Haley. Toni structured her grueling clinic schedule around school drop-offs, piano lessons, and family dinners. She radiated a quiet, steady warmth, anchoring her family with an unwavering sense of duty. In the affluent suburbs of Highlands Ranch, Colorado, Toni stood out as a beacon of stability. Her home featured perfectly manicured lawns, a quiet cul-de-sac, and the facade of the ultimate American dream. To the outside world, Harold Henthorne played the role of the perfect supportive counterpart to his brilliant wife. He presented himself as an incredibly wealthy, well-connected entrepreneur and a dedicated philanthropist. He drove expensive luxury vehicles, wore tailored outdoor gear, and frequently spoke about his exhaustive business travel and high-stakes investments. Neighbors saw him as a devoted father who doted on little Haley, often arranging elaborate family vacations and surprise weekend getaways. He maintained an image of absolute devotion, ensuring he was the one to manage the complex household finances so Toni could focus entirely on her demanding medical practice. This arrangement required Toni to surrender complete control over her personal wealth, life insurance policies, and investment portfolios to her husband. It was an arrangement built on complete trust, an illusion that masked a chilling, hollow reality behind the closed doors of their sprawling Colorado estate. The truth about Harold Henthorne was entirely different from the narrative he sold to his community. He possessed no actual clients, no legitimate business infrastructure, and no verifiable source of independent income. His daily routine consisted of driving away in his luxury car, parking in a local strip mall, and spending hours sitting in a coffee shop, surfing the internet. He was a master of psychological manipulation, carefully controlling Toni and slowly isolating her from her fiercely protective Mississippi family. Whenever Toni expressed exhaustion or a desire to reduce her clinic hours to spend more time with their daughter, Harold immediately deflected, citing upcoming, fictitious business ventures that required her temporary financial support. He constructed a towering labyrinth of lies, waiting patiently for the perfect isolated moment to orchestrate a permanent solution to his financial dependencies. The turning point in the investigation arrives mere hours after Toni takes her fatal plunge in the remote reaches of Rocky Mountain National Park. Investigators map out the rugged geography of the Deer Mountain Trail, a sprawling, untamed wilderness of jagged rock formations, steep ravines, and dense pine forests. The specific cliff edge where Toni fell is highly irregular, located far off the designated heavily trafficked hiking path. As federal park rangers begin meticulously documenting the scene, another team conducts a routine inventory of Harold's sport utility vehicle parked at the trailhead. Inside the meticulously clean cabin, they uncover a standard-issue park map resting on the passenger seat. The document holds a terrifying detail that stops the lead investigator in his tracks. A perfectly drawn bright pink highlighter mark forms a distinct cross directly over the exact remote geographic coordinate where Toni met her catastrophic end. This glaring physical anomaly shatters the illusion of a tragic, spontaneous hiking accident, triggering an immediate and intense federal inquiry. Investigators confront Harold with the highlighted map, and he nervously stammers, offering a convoluted excuse that he merely marked a general area of interest for a scenic photograph. The federal agents refuse to accept this shallow deflection and immediately secure search warrants for the Henthorne residence. As detectives dig through boxes of heavily guarded financial documents in his home office, they run his name through the national crime databases. The search yields a horrific, deeply buried secret from the mid-1990s. The name Harold Henthorne is already securely attached to another fatal, highly unusual incident involving a spouse. The database reveals the tragic fate of Sandra Lynn Henthorne, Harold S.'s first wife, who passed away in May of 1995. The official files from Douglas County, Colorado, paint a grim picture of a horrific roadside incident. According to the original police report, Harold and Sandra were driving on a desolate, poorly lit stretch of rural highway when their vehicle supposedly suffered a flat tire. Harold claimed he asked Sandra to slide under the heavy vehicle to retrieve a dropped lug nut, at which point the single bottle jack mysteriously failed. The massive frame crushed Sandra, ending her life instantly in the darkness. Local authorities at the time accepted Harold's frantic narrative without conducting a rigorous forensic recreation, officially closing the file as a tragic freak mechanical failure. The federal agents staring at the screen now realize they are not dealing with a grieving widower, but a calculated, patient predator hiding behind the mask of terrible luck. The realization that two different women lost their lives in isolated, bizarre circumstances while completely alone with Harold Henthorne forces the Federal Bureau of Investigation to launch a massive, dual-track operation. Agents systematically reconstruct the final days of Toni Henthorne, beginning with a microscopic audit of the couple's financial architecture. Forensic accountants comb through thousands of banking transactions, discovering that Harold had systematically drained Toni's professional earnings into untraceable private accounts. They painstakingly trace the origination of 3 massive life insurance policies, totaling $4.7 million taken out on Toni's life. The paperwork reveals a chilling detail. Harold forged Toni E.'s signature on the final, most lucrative policy just weeks before the anniversary trip to Rocky Mountain National Park. He deliberately listed himself as the sole uncontented beneficiary, structuring the legal documents to ensure immediate payout upon a sudden catastrophic demise. While the Financial Crimes Unit dismantles Harold's monetary web, a separate team of seasoned detectives reopens the 1995 cold case of Sandra Henthorne. They pull the dusty, yellowing cardboard boxes from the Douglas County archives and immediately notice infuriating systemic failures in the original local investigation. The 1995 deputies failed to impound the vehicle for long-term mechanical testing, and they never properly photographed the tire jack to verify if it was actually defective. Furthermore, a glaring jurisdictional loophole allowed the local coroner to sign off on the death certificate without requesting a specialized biomechanical autopsy. The detectives tracked down the original first responders who arrived on that dark, lonely highway in 1995. These retired officers provide harrowing new testimony, recalling how Harold seemed unusually composed his clothes completely free of grease or dirt, despite supposedly struggling to lift a heavy vehicle off his trapped wife. Detectives meticulously mapped the geography of the 1995 incident, driving to the exact stretch of rural highway where Sandra lost her life. They note the steep, uneven shoulder of the road, realizing it is the worst possible location for a driver to attempt a tire change. Forensic engineers conduct a rigorous reconstruction using an identical vehicle, model, and the exact same brand of bottle jack. They repeatedly attempt to make the jack slip on the uneven gravel. The engineers conclude that the jack could not fail on its own under the vehicle's weight unless a human hand intentionally kicked or pushed the device out of its locked position. Financial records from 1995 surface, revealing that Harold collected nearly $500,000 in life insurance following Sandra's demise. The pattern is undeniable. Yet the investigators know that proving a 2-decade-old case in court will require far more than suspicious similarities. The focus shifts aggressively back to the rugged terrain of Rocky Mountain National Park and the final moments of Tony Henthorne. Detectives interview Tony's family and colleagues in Mississippi, uncovering a series of terrifying near misses that preceded the fatal anniversary trip. Just 1 year prior, Harold had taken Tony to a remote cabin where a heavy piece of lumber mysteriously fell from the roof, striking her and causing a severe cervical injury. Harold claimed it was a freak construction accident, but the family suspected he intentionally dropped the beam. To build an airtight federal case, investigators subpoena cell tower data from the national park region. The digital footprints reveal that Harold made multiple, solitary scouting trips to the exact cliffside on Deer Mountain in the weeks leading up to the anniversary hike. He was not looking for a scenic photograph location. He was methodically selecting the perfect isolated drop zone. The forensic buildup becomes agonizingly precise as investigators coordinate with elite Park Service geologists to map the microscopic details of the fatal cliff edge. The geologists physically repaw down the 130-foot granite face, taking precise measurements of the ledge where Tony supposedly lost her footing. They document the exact slope angle, the texture of the granite, and the specific friction coefficient of the specialized hiking boots Tony was wearing that day. Investigators use weighted anthropomorphic test dummies matching Tony's exact height and mass, conducting dozens of simulated falls from the edge. They record the precise trajectory and impact points of every single drop. The scientific results present a devastating, undeniable truth that will become the cornerstone of the prosecution. The geological and biomechanical data prove that a person slipping backward from a standing position on that specific ledge would land on a jagged outcropping barely 20 feet below the edge. Tony's remains, however, were located 130 feet down clear of the outcropping, resting at the very bottom of the ravine. To clear that 20-foot secondary ledge, a body would require significant forward momentum. It required a violent horizontal propulsion that absolutely could not be generated by a simple stumble. The physics dictate that Tony did not slip while adjusting her camera. She was deliberately, forcefully shoved off the edge by the man she trusted with her life. Armed with the irrefutable laws of physics, the forged life insurance documents, and the damning highlighted park map, federal prosecutors finally secure a grand jury indictment, preparing to drag a serial predator out of the shadows and into the harsh light of a courtroom. The federal trial of Harold Henthorne commences in Denver, drawing national attention as prosecutors systematically expose the terrifying reality hiding behind his affluent suburban facade. The courtroom sits in stunned silence as the prosecution maps out the remote geography of Deer Mountain, placing the jury visually on that isolated, treacherous ledge. They present the highlighted park map, an undeniable piece of physical evidence that Harold planned the exact location of the tragedy long before they ever left their driveway. The forensic geologists take the stand, displaying the complex biomechanical drop simulations on large monitors. They explain, with cold, mathematical precision, that Tony's trajectory over the cliff required a forceful, calculated push. The defense attempts to present Harold as a tragic victim of terrible luck, a grieving husband who simply panicked during a horrific accident. But the prosecution counters with the crushing weight of the financial motive, projecting the $4.7 million in life insurance policies onto the courtroom screen. The ultimate revelation arrives when the prosecution seamlessly weaves the 1995 tragedy of Sandra Henthorne into the current trial, demonstrating the unmistakable calculated blueprint of a career predator. They bring forward the retired Douglas County first responders, who testify to Harold's pristine clothing and eerie calmness while his first wife lay crushed beneath the vehicle. The prosecution outlines the identical methodology. In both instances, Harold carefully selected an isolated, desolate location far from any potential witnesses. In both instances, he utilized his charming, trustworthy demeanor to place his wife in a highly vulnerable physical position. And in both instances, he immediately attempted to cash in massive life insurance policies while playing the role of the devastated widower. The arrogant, supposedly wealthy entrepreneur is finally unmasked before the jury as a cold, methodical architect of despair, a man who harvested the trust and wealth of successful women before discarding them in the wilderness. In September 2015, the federal jury returns a definitive, swift verdict, finding Harold Henthorne guilty of the first-degree premeditated taking of Tony Henthorne's life. The federal judge delivers a scathing rebuke during the sentencing hearing, condemning Harold for his breathtaking arrogance and his terrifying lack of human empathy. Harold is sentenced to a mandatory term of life in federal prison without the possibility of parole, guaranteeing he will draw his last breath behind reinforced steel doors. The staggering financial assets he stole are permanently frozen, eventually redirected into a trust to provide for Tony's young daughter, Hallie, ensuring she will be raised far away from the dark shadow of her father. Tony's family from Mississippi leaves the courthouse with a profound sense of closure, finally securing the absolute justice that their brilliant, loving daughter deserved. The federal conviction creates a massive ripple effect across the state of Colorado, prompting Douglas County officials to officially reclassify the 1995 passing of Sandra Henthorne from an accidental death to a deliberate criminal act. While the life sentence in the federal penitentiary renders a second trial practically unnecessary, the historical record is permanently corrected, finally giving Sandra A.'s family the truth they were denied for 2 decades. The Henthorne case stands as a masterclass in relentless forensic geology and financial auditing, proving that no matter how isolated the location, the physical evidence will always betray the perpetrator. Yet, Harold Henthorne was not the only man to successfully use the isolation of nature to conceal a horrific act, nor was he the only one to evade justice for decades due to a tragically overlooked death certificate. Down in the deep, murky waters of the Cantleseu River in 1962 Louisiana, another grieving husband was busy telling local authorities that his wife simply slipped beneath the surface, setting the stage for a 50-year mystery. The dark waters of the Cantleseu River in Louisiana swallowed 22-year-old Mary Horton Vale in the autumn of 1962. Her husband Felix, stood on the muddy bank and told deputies she had fallen from their boat while fishing in the twilight. The local authorities took his word, closing the file without a proper investigation or even a standard autopsy. For 50 years, that dark river kept a terrible secret, until an investigative journalist named Jerry Mitchell opened the dusty file and noticed a terrifying anomaly. Felix Vale was the last person seen with not just Mary, but 2 other women who had vanished from the face of the earth. Mary Horton grew up surrounded by the thick pine forests and humid air of southern Louisiana. She spent her youth walking the dirt roads of Calasieu Parish. Her family knew her as a bright, dedicated young woman with a sharp mind. She envisioned a stable future filled with family dinners and quiet evenings on a wrap-around porch. The year 1962 brought a crisp autumn to the region. Mary celebrated her 22nd birthday. She also gave birth to a baby boy. Motherhood transformed her daily routine into a cycle of feeding and nurturing. She centered her entire existence on the well-being of her infant. Her days revolved around the small wooden house she shared with her new husband. Felix Vale projected the image of a charming, carefree soul. He possessed a charismatic smile that disarmed neighbors and local shopkeepers behind this mask of a normal, hard-working family man. A calculating predator watched and evaluated. Felix operated as a drifter in his mind, rejecting the responsibilities of a traditional life. He craved control over every interaction. He isolated Mary from her support network through subtle manipulations. He restricted her access to the family vehicle. He dictated the schedule of their daily lives down to the minute. Mary found herself trapped in an invisible cage constructed from his demanding expectations. The physical geography of their isolated home, sitting miles from the nearest town center, amplified her vulnerability. The community viewed them as a typical young couple navigating the challenges of early parenthood. They attended local gatherings and maintained a facade of domestic tranquility. Mary pushed her doubts aside to focus on her newborn son. She wrote letters to her mother detailing the milestones of her baby. She never mentioned the growing darkness inside her marriage. Felix maintained a rigid schedule of solitary hobbies to escape the crying infant. He spent hours tracing the winding waterways of the Calasieu River. He memorized the depths, the currents, and the isolated coves of the dark water. Mary remained in the house, rocking her child to sleep under the hum of a rotating ceiling fan. She had no idea her husband viewed her as an obstacle. The point of no return arrived on the evening of October 28, 1962. The sun dipped below the cypress trees, casting long shadows across the black water of the river. Felix returned to the local dock with an empty boat and a frantic demeanor. He claimed Mary fell overboard while adjusting a trot line in the twilight. Authorities dragged the deep channel for 2 days before locating her remains. Local law enforcement committed a catastrophic failure of procedure right on the riverbank. The coroner declared the incident an accidental drowning without ordering an autopsy. Investigators ignored the deep bruising visible on Mary's neck and face. They allowed a charismatic man to dictate the official narrative of a fatal event. The system placed rigid protocol and paperwork efficiency above the pursuit of truth. Felix walked away a free man, packing his belongings and leaving Louisiana behind. He spent the next 5 decades drifting across the country and adopting new personas. The file gathered dust in a forgotten cardboard box in the parish courthouse basement. This grand illusion held steady until the year 2012. Investigative journalist Jerry Mitchell began digging into a completely different cold case. He traced a web of missing persons reports connected to a single name. Mitchell documented the vanishing of Sharon Hensley in the year 1973. He then uncovered the disappearance of Annette Craver in the year 1984. Felix Vale was the last person seen with both of these women. Mitchell realized the 1962 drowning of Mary Horton served as the genesis of a horrific pattern. This journalistic revelation prompted Annette Craver's mother to launch a relentless pressure campaign against Louisiana officials. She demanded a full review of the ancient paperwork sitting in Calasiu Parish. Law enforcement opened the brittle folders from half a century ago. Detectives discovered the original black and white photographs taken at the makeshift morgue. These images showed distinct, undeniable signs of trauma on Mary's body. The local prosecutor assembled a modern task force to evaluate the cold evidence. In the year 2013, officers tracked Felix down to a secluded property. They placed him in handcuffs for the fatal events of 1962. A judge signed the warrant based entirely on the photographic evidence ignored by previous generations of police. The arrest initiated the most complex legal battle in state history. The investigation faced an immediate, towering obstacle built by time itself. The original coroner who signed the death certificate had passed away decades earlier. The physical evidence from the 1962 scene no longer existed in any evidence locker. The defense team filed aggressive motions to dismiss the case entirely. They cited the extreme delay and the lack of primary witnesses as a violation of due process. Prosecutors spent weeks combing through the jurisdictional codes of the era. They uncovered the specific administrative loophole that allowed the original failure. The local coroner in 1962 lacked a medical degree, operating instead as an elected parish official. This specific structural flaw permitted a lineman to override the visual evidence of trauma. The modern detectives had to build a case relying solely on secondary documentation. To establish intent, the prosecution team turned their attention to the long gap between the tragedy and the arrest. They traced Felix's movements to the year 1973. During this period, he traveled with a young woman named Sharon Hensley. Sharon confided in her family about Felix's controlling nature before she vanished without a trace. Felix told her parents she decided to start a new life on a sailboat. Detectives scoured maritime records and found zero evidence of this alleged vessel. He used a fabricated story to delay the missing persons report by critical weeks. The investigators mapped the distance between her last known location and the vast ocean. The physical geography provided him with infinite locations to conceal his actions. The pattern of deception mirrored the exact tactics he used on the riverbank in Louisiana. The detectives then advanced their timeline to the year 1984. Felix had settled in a different state with a vibrant young woman named Anantet Craver. Anantet possessed a significant inheritance, which Felix drained from her accounts. She vanished just as her mother began asking pointed questions about the missing funds. Felix presented a forged letter claiming Annette went to Mexico for an extended spiritual retreat. He used his calm, arrogant demeanor to convince local deputies the departure was voluntary. The investigation into her absence hit a factual dead end when a border town motel clerk identified a different woman as Annette. This false sighting halted the official search for 3 crucial months. By the time authorities realized the error, Felix had relocated again. He left behind an empty house and another shattered family. The prosecution faced a monumental legal challenge in bringing these later disappearances into the Louisiana courtroom. The judge scheduled a series of pre-trial hearings to debate the admissibility of Sharon and Annette. The defense argued these subsequent events had no direct link to the 1962 incident. The state countered by invoking the legal doctrine of chances. This specific legal principle dictates that a high number of identical, improbable oddities surrounding one person nullifies the claim of an accident. The prosecutors detailed the aquatic environments present in all 3 timelines. They mapped the proximity of deep water to every location where a partner vanished. The judge spent a full week reviewing the dense legal precedents. The court delivered a crushing blow to the defense. The judge ruled the jury would hear the full scope of Felix's devastating history. With the legal framework secured, the detectives focused on the forensic analysis of the ancient photographs. They enlisted a team of the top forensic pathologists in the country. These medical experts spent hours magnifying the black and white images of Mary's neck and jaw. They mapped the precise location of every dark mark and abrasion. The distance between the contusions indicated a specific forceful grip. The experts ruled out the defense's theory of a collision with underwater debris. Debris in a river current strikes at random angles, leaving chaotic, uneven scrapes. The marks on Mary formed a distinct uniform pattern consistent with human hands. The medical team compiled a massive report detailing the anatomical impossibility of an accidental fall. The unearthing of this truth required stripping away decades of institutional ignorance. As the trial date approached, the community braced for a historic reckoning. Investigators rehearsed their testimonies. Knowing the defense would attack every minor discrepancy in the vintage reports, the district attorney mapped out a narrative that connected the dark waters of the Cantalaysayu River to the vast oceans where the others vanished. They prepared a visual timeline board spanning more than 50 feet in length. This physical exhibit demonstrated the calculated evolution of a predator. Felix sat in his county jail cell, maintaining an aura of absolute superiority. He told fellow inmates the state lacked the concrete proof required for a conviction. He believed his half-century of freedom proved his intellectual dominance over the legal system. The detectives finalized the witness list, securing the medical experts who would translate the silent photographs. The stage was set to shatter an illusion that had endured since the Kennedy administration. The trial commenced in August of the year 2016. The heavy wooden doors of the Louisiana courthouse sealed the gallery inside a tense, air-conditioned room. The prosecution opened their case by displaying the enlarged grim photographs on a massive screen. The modern forensic pathologist took the witness stand. They pointed to the distinct defensive injuries captured in the emulsion of the old film. The doctors explained the physiology of the bruising. The marks indicated Mary fought for her life in her final moments. The staccato rhythm of the expert testimony dismantled the accident theory piece by piece. Felix watched the presentation with cold, empty eyes. His mask of an ordinary man fractured under the weight of undeniable science. The state then introduced the chilling narratives of Sharon Hensley and Annette Craver. Family members took the stand to recount the deception, the forged letters, and the stolen funds. The prosecution wove the three timelines into a single, terrifying portrait of aquatic disposal. The jury saw a man who hunted in the shadows of everyday life. The defense scrambled to introduce reasonable doubt. They cross-examined the aged witnesses, questioning memories degraded by the passage of time. The attorneys failed to explain the doctrine of chances. The jury realized a man does not lose three consecutive partners to the elements. The physical evidence of the photographs anchored the horrific reality. The truth echoed through the silent courtroom. The jury retreated to the deliberation room to weigh 50 years of deferred justice. They returned with a definitive verdict of guilt for the fatal events of 1962. Felix Vale, at 76 years old, secured his dark place in history. He became the oldest suspected serial predator convicted in the United States. The judge delivered a stern rebuke of his lifelong deception. The court sentenced him to life in a maximum security prison without the possibility of parole. Law enforcement closed the loop on a systemic failure that cost multiple lives. The community exhaled watching the arrogant drifter shuffle out of the courtroom in chains. Justice arrived late, but it carried absolute finality. The shadows of the Calcasieu River lost their terrifying grip on the town. Felix perished behind the concrete walls of a Louisiana state penitentiary in the year 2017. He took his final breaths in a sterile infirmary bed. He refused to offer any confessions before his demise. The exact locations of Sharon Hensley and Annette Craver remain hidden to this day. Their families continue to search the coastlines and forgotten roads for answers. The legacy of Mary Horton lives on as the catalyst that ended his reign of terror. Her ancient photograph served as the ultimate witness from beyond the water. The legal precedent set by this trial changed how the state prosecutes ancient cases. The system learned a hard lesson about the cost of rigid, verified protocols. A tragic loss of life forced a permanent shift in criminal procedure. The case of Felix Vale demonstrated how a predator uses natural environments to erase their tracks. He manipulated deep water and vast distances to maintain a facade of tragic misfortune. His arrogance allowed him to believe the passage of time offered absolute immunity. The tireless work of a journalist and a mother dismantled a 50-year lie. The dedication of modern forensics provided a voice to a young woman silenced in her prime. True crime often reveals the monsters hiding behind the mask of a charming neighbor. Our journey through these dark files must continue. While this man used the murky depths of a Louisiana river to conceal his actions, another predator chose a different theater of deception. Our next case takes us behind the closed doors of an affluent Georgia suburb, where a staged scene and a misplaced revolver pointed directly at a prominent local dentist. December 4, 2004, in Gwinnett County, Georgia. A 7-year-old boy walks into the master bedroom of his upscale, suburban home expecting to find his mother asleep. Instead, he finds 33-year-old Jennifer Corbin lying motionless in her bed with a heavy revolver resting on the blankets near her hand. The scene presents a pristine picture of a tragic, self-inflicted end. First responders arrive and process the room with a sense of routine finality, ready to close the case before it even opens. Yet, one crime scene technician stares at the fatal wound behind the victim's right ear. The geometry of the scene makes no physical sense. The narrative of despair shatters against the cold reality of forensic physics. The community of Sugar Hill, Georgia, radiated affluent tranquility in the early 2000s. Manicured lawns lined the wide avenues framed by tall oak trees and glowing sodium streetlights. The Corbin residence sat at the end of a quiet cul-de-sac, offering a facade of perfect suburban security. Jennifer Corbin represented the heart of this neighborhood. She spent her days as a beloved preschool teacher at the local Methodist church. Her voice carried a natural warmth that calmed anxious toddlers and reassured nervous parents. She devoted her entire existence to her 2 young sons. Her daily routine revolved around packing school lunches, managing soccer practices, and grading finger paint projects at her kitchen table. She created a sanctuary of joy for her children, masking the profound isolation she experienced in her own home. Her husband, Dr. Barton Corbin, stood as a pillar of the local professional community. He ran a thriving dental practice in the neighboring town. Patients viewed him as a charming, intelligent, and capable healthcare provider. He wore tailored suits, drove luxury vehicles, and projected an image of absolute superiority. Behind the heavy oak doors of their home, this polished exterior fell away. Dr. Corbin exercised strict, unyielding control over every aspect of his family life. He dictated the finances, isolated Jennifer from her friends, and subjected her to constant emotional degradation. He demanded perfection and punished any perceived defiance with prolonged silence and intense psychological pressure. His arrogance consumed the oxygen in the house. Jennifer refused to let her children grow up in an environment defined by fear. In the autumn of 2004, she began laying the groundwork for a permanent escape. She initiated divorce proceedings seeking legal separation and primary custody of her sons. She also sought solace outside the suffocating walls of her marriage. Late at night, sitting in the glow of a heavy desktop monitor, she played an online multiplayer role-playing game called EverQuest. Through this digital escape, she formed an emotional connection with another player who went by the name Chris. She shared her fears, her hopes, and her plans for a liberated future. Dr. Corbin noticed the shifting power dynamic in his household. He could feel his absolute control slipping away. He began tracking her movements, monitoring her digital footprint, and shadowing her routines. The master bedroom of the Corbin home occupied the second floor, located at the end of a long, carpeted hallway. On the morning of December 4, 2004, the house sat cloaked in an eerie silence. The heavy metallic click of the front door lock never sounded, as Dr. Corbin had left the property before dawn. Neighbors heard no disturbances across the quiet cul-de-sac when the young boy found his mother. The ensuing panic brought uniformed patrol officers and detectives to the property. Investigators walked up the stairs, noting the pristine condition of the home. No shattered glass littered the entryway, and no signs of forced entry existed on the ground floor windows. The scene in the bedroom looked arranged with extreme precision to suggest Jennifer took her own life. A large caliber revolver sat resting centered on the bedsheets beside her right hand. Detectives began photographing the room, working their way from the door to the bed. The lead investigator examined the position of the revolver and the specific location of the fatal wound. The projectile had entered behind Jennifer's right ear at an awkward, downward angle. The revolver itself felt massive, requiring significant grip strength to operate the trigger. A person of Jennifer's stature would have to contort their arm into a posture impossible by the laws of physics to inflict that specific wound. Furthermore, the weapon did not belong to Jennifer. A trace on the serial number confirmed the firearm belonged to Dr. Barton Corbin. The pristine condition of the house now pointed toward an internal threat. The facade of a self-inflicted tragedy began to dissolve, revealing the calculated mechanics of a staged execution. Detectives pulled Dr. Corbin into an interrogation room. He sat with his arms crossed, projecting an aura of immense irritation rather than grief. He pointed them toward his wife's online relationship and her desire for a divorce, attempting to frame her as an unstable, depressed woman. Instead of accepting his narrative, investigators ran a comprehensive background check on the prominent dentist. The query reached into archival databases, pulling records from 14 years prior. The results sent a profound chill through the precinct. In 1990, a young woman named Dolly Harn had been found dead under identical circumstances. She was Dr. Corbin's former girlfriend during his time at the Medical College of Georgia. Her death was caused by a single gunshot wound and ruled self-inflicted. The exact same name kept entering the case files. The Richmond County Sheriff's Office in Augusta, Georgia, held the dusty archive boxes detailing Dolly Harn's death. Gwinnett County detectives requested the entire physical file, including crime scene photographs, autopsy reports, and witness statements from 14 years earlier. They spread the documents across a large conference table, mapping out the geography of Dolly's cramped college apartment. Dolly was a vibrant, brilliant 27-year-old dental student with a promising future. She had dated Barton Corbin but ended the relationship due to his possessive, suffocating behavior. After the breakup, she experienced a relentless campaign of psychological terror. Her apartment was vandalized with stolen items and destroyed property. Corbin stalked her across the campus, parking outside her windows and watching her movements in the dark. Dolly recognized the danger and reported the harassment to local authorities and university officials. The system left her exposed without defense. Campus security viewed the stalking as a mere domestic dispute between young professionals. Local police took down her statements but cited rigid protocols requiring physical violence before they could intervene. A fatal legal loophole allowed a predator hiding behind a white coat to operate unchecked. On June 6, 1990, friends found Dolly deceased on her sofa. A handgun rested in her lap, positioned with deliberate care. The local medical examiner took a cursory look at the scene, noted the presence of the weapon, and signed the death certificate. They ignored the terrifying context of the stalking and closed the case as a self-inflicted end. Armed with the 1990 case files, modern forensic experts began an exhaustive comparison of the two scenes. They digitized the old Polaroid photographs from Augusta and displayed them next to the high-resolution images from Sugar Hill. The staging mirrored itself across a span of 14 years. In both instances, the victims were positioned in a relaxed, seated, or lying posture. In both instances, the weapon was placed close to the dominant hand, lacking the chaotic displacement typical of a genuine recoil. Blood spatter analysts examined the 1990 autopsy photos. They discovered that Dolly's wound, much like Jennifer's, originated from an angle that defied human anatomy. A person holding that specific handgun could not turn their wrist far enough to create that entry path. While forensic teams dismantled the physical staging, digital investigators chased the trail of Jennifer's online affair. Dr. Corbin's defense team began leaking information to the press, pushing a narrative that Jennifer's secret life drove her to despair. Detectives secured search warrants for the internet service providers, tracking IP addresses across state lines. The digital footprint led them away from Georgia and straight to a residence in Missouri. They expected to find a man named Chris, but they knocked on the door of a woman who had fabricated the entire persona. She had engaged in a digital fantasy, never intending to meet Jennifer in reality. When confronted with the tragic news, the woman expressed genuine shock. She provided airtight LIIs and digital logs proving she never left Missouri. The defense theory of a mysterious online lover committing the act crumbled into dust. Detectives returned their complete focus to Dr. Corbin. They constructed a timeline of his movements on the morning of December 4th. Cell tower records placed his mobile device inside the Sugar Hill residence during the exact window of Jennifer's demise. Financial records showed he had moved large sums of money, preparing for a protracted legal battle over his assets. He believed his status as a wealthy medical professional made him untouchable. He believed his intelligence surpassed that of the local police. Prosecutors from 2 different jurisdictions convened a secret meeting. The Gwinnett County District Attorney and the Richmond County District Attorney decided to pool their resources, forming a massive joint task force. They secured a grand jury indictment for the death of Jennifer Corbin and simultaneously reopened the Dolly Hearn investigation to charge him with her demise as well. The walls closed in on Dr. Barton Corbin. Police cruisers surrounded his dental practice, and officers walked straight through the waiting room. They bypassed the receptionist and entered his private office. They placed the arrogant predator in steel cuffs. He offered no resistance and showed no emotion. He maintained a mask of absolute contempt for the investigators. The community reacted with profound shock. Patients could not reconcile the gentle dentist with the monster detailed in the indictments. The grand facade shattered in real time. The year 2006 brought the long-awaited trial. The courtroom in Gwinnett County felt heavy with anticipation. Families of both victims sat in the gallery, sharing a bond forged in unimaginable grief. The prosecution laid out the physical mechanics of the firearms. They presented the blood spatter evidence to the jury. They projected the impossible wound angles onto large screens. The defense attorneys tried to argue reasonable doubt, attempting to revive the narrative of despair. The jury saw right through the deceptive tactics. The overwhelming weight of 2 identical crime scenes crushed the defense. 14 years separated the events, yet the signature remained identical. Dr. Corbin realized he could not outsmart the forensic science. He realized his wealth could not buy an acquittal. He faced the very real threat of capital punishment. Just days into the proceedings, the arrogant dentist broke. He abandoned his trial strategy and stood before the judge. He pleaded guilty to the malice deaths of both Jennifer Corbin and Dolly Hearn, trading his pride for his life. The presiding judge accepted the guilty pleas and sentenced Dr. Barton Corbin to 2 concurrent life terms in a Georgia state penitentiary. He traded his tailored suits for standard-issue prison garments and his luxury vehicles for a concrete cell. The gavel strike brought a delayed, heavy sense of justice to the Hearn family. For 16 years, they had carried the unbearable burden of a false narrative. They fought against a system that labeled their daughter's death a self-inflicted tragedy. The verdict vindicated Dolly, proving she was the victim of a calculated strike by a man who refused to accept rejection. The state of Georgia corrected the death certificate, clearing her name in the historical record. For the Corbin family, the resolution provided definitive proof that Jennifer did not abandon her children by choice. Her sons would grow up knowing their mother fought to create a better, safer life for them. They would know her future was stolen with malice by the man who was supposed to protect them. The case forced law enforcement agencies across the state to reevaluate protocol for stalking complaints. The authorities closed the administrative loopholes that allowed a predator to operate unchecked for over a decade. The truth pierced through years of deception and institutional blindness. Yet, history proves that dangerous individuals often use a mask of respectability to hide their fatal intentions. Much like a trusted religious figure whose mysterious illness in 1989 North Carolina would reveal a bedside companion with a terrifying affinity for poison. The fluorescent lights of the North Carolina Baptist Hospital hummed with a sterile mechanical rhythm. Reverend Raymond Reed lay trapped in a maze of medical tubes, his nervous system failing from a mysterious, agonizing affliction. Sitting in a vinyl chair by his bedside was his devoted fiancée, Blanche Taylor Moore. She offered soft prayers and gently spoon-fed him sweet banana pudding. It painted a picture of absolute, unwavering devotion. Yet, deep within the laboratory wings of that very same hospital, toxicologists were staring at a set of blood panels that defied medical logic. The kind church-going grandmother was not providing comfort. She was methodically delivering a highly regulated archaic poison. The town of Burlington, North Carolina, operated on the quiet, predictable rhythms of the American South. Thick canopy trees shaded modest brick homes, and the local textile mills provided a steady heartbeat of industry for the working class. Within this deeply interconnected community, Blanche Taylor Moore stood as a pillar of unwavering faith and domestic grace. She taught Sunday school, arranged flowers for the altar, and played the organ during weekly services. Neighbors recognized her as the first person to arrive at a grieving home with a warm covered dish. Her public persona radiated traditional virtues and maternal warmth. People sought her counsel during difficult times, trusting her completely. She embedded herself into the very fabric of the local church hierarchy. No one possessed the slightest reason to look behind her immaculate facade. Before assuming her role as a pious widow, Blanche shared a long marriage with her first husband, James Taylor. James worked tirelessly as a veteran employee at a local textile plant. They occupied a quiet, unassuming house on a well-kept street. Their daily routine mirrored the standard mid-century American dream. However, in the early months of 1973, James experienced a catastrophic physical decline. He suffered from relentless gastrointestinal distress, terrifying muscle spasms, and an inability to process basic nutrients. His body deteriorated rapidly under the care of his attentive wife. When his heart finally gave out, the attending physicians completely missed the textbook, flashing red indicators of heavy metal toxicity. The medical establishment simply wrote off his demise as a fatal heart attack following a severe viral infection. The systemic failure to mandate a basic autopsy granted a predator the ultimate confirmation of her own invincibility. By the late 1980s, Blanche shifted her focus toward another highly respected community figure. Reverend Raymond Reed possessed a commanding presence, guiding his congregation with robust energy and compassion. However, a sudden terrifying affliction stripped the life from his sturdy frame. His symptoms precisely mirrored the horrific, undocumented agony of James Taylor. Reed endured burning sensations in his extremities, severe skin degradation, and an absolute collapse of his digestive tract. Once again, Blanche assumed her position at the bedside, playing the role of the tragic, suffering caretaker. She spent her days in his hospital room, offering endless cups of ice and homemade treats. The medical staff praised her dedication, completely oblivious to the lethal exchanges happening right in front of them. The flawless cycle of deception finally broke when a vigilant physician began reviewing the medical charts of yet another man connected to Blanche. Dr. Garlington noticed an impossible statistical anomaly regarding severe undiagnosed neurological degradation trailing a single woman. He refused to let the rigid bureaucratic hospital protocols blind him to the glaring data. Law enforcement secured an emergency judicial order to breach the soil of a local Alamance County cemetery. Heavy machinery hauled the bronze caskets of James Taylor and Blanche's father, Pete Kaiser, back to the surface. Forensic pathologists bypassed the standard superficial local clinics, sending tissue samples directly to state-level laboratories. The chemical analysis returned with staggering clarity. The victim's tissues held unprecedented lethal concentrations of arsenic. The investigators realized the sweet church organist possessed a terrifying historical pattern of burying the men she claimed to love. The North Carolina State Bureau of Investigation transformed their laboratory into a command center for the case. Stark fluorescent lights reflected off long stainless steel tables covered in exhumation reports. Chemists worked to isolate the exact chemical signature of the poison, saturating the preserved tissues. They identified the substance as an active ingredient found in older, highly toxic agricultural compounds. Detectives immediately began mapping the physical geography of Blanche's daily routines. They canvassed hardware stores, feed suppliers, and garden centers across 3 different counties. Investigators sifted through stacks of paper receipts and dusty carbon copies, searching for a single matching purchase. The tedious, grinding legwork eventually yielded a specific, heavily regulated product. Blanche had routinely purchased an arsenic-based ant killer known as anti-ant. This powerful agricultural chemical formed the foundational weapon of her hidden arsenal. With the weapon identified, investigators dove deep into the precise timeline of Reverend Reed's medical decline. They subpoenaed every single page of nursing notes, dietary logs, and visitor registries from the hospital. Detectives physically walked through the layout of Reedy's third-floor corner suite. They noted the heavy wooden door that provided privacy, the small bedside tray, and the vinyl recliner where Blanche spent her days. A terrifying chronological correlation emerged from the heavy stacks of medical charts. Whenever Blanche visited the ward, Reid experienced catastrophic drops in his vital signs just hours later. The handwritten dietary logs detailed a constant, unregulated influx of outside food bypassing the hospital kitchens. Blanche routinely brought him his favorite dessert, homemade banana pudding laced with the heavy metal. The hospital's loose security protocols unwittingly provided a safe haven for a predator to operate. The psychological magnitude of the horror slowly dawned on the investigative team. They recognized the sheer emotional torture inflicted upon Reverend Reed. He trusted his fiancée entirely, looking at her with deep gratitude while she methodically ruined his internal organs. She forced him to rely on her for his most basic physical needs, forging a sick dynamic of absolute dependency. Arsenic neuropathy inflicts an excruciating reality, creating the sensation of thousands of hot needles piercing the soles of the feet. Blanche watched him writhe in agony for hours. She offered cool, damp washcloths and whispered prayers while calculating the exact dosage of her next chemical delivery. She weaponized his love, turning his trust into the very instrument of his agonizing decline. The detective saw past the grandmotherly facade, uncovering a cold, calculating tactician. Despite the overwhelming circumstantial timeline, law enforcement encountered a massive legal and scientific hurdle. The physical chain of custody for the food items no longer existed. Detectives could not extract samples from the pudding that Reed consumed months prior. The defense prepared a rigorous strategy to argue environmental contamination. They planned to suggest Reed ingested the toxins accidentally through an old water well or agricultural runoff near his property. To secure a conviction, detectives needed to eliminate every single environmental variable in Alamance County. Teams deployed to test the soil around Reed's home, gathering core samples from the yard. They tested the municipal water supply and the pipes beneath his foundation. They dismantled the environmental defense layer by layer, generating a mountain of clean soil reports. The scientific data definitively proved the only source of arsenic was the woman sitting beside his bed. Simultaneously, financial investigators followed the paper trail to establish a concrete motive. They subpoenaed bank records, property deeds, and pages of heavily stamped probate documents. Their search uncovered a recently altered will executed just days before Reed lost his physical ability to hold a pen. The rigid protocols of the probate court had completely failed to flag obvious signs of coercion. A dying man suffering profound neurological collapse and heavily medicated supposedly transferred vast sums of money directly to his caretaker. The legal loophole allowing an interested party to oversee the signing of estate documents provided Blanche with unchecked financial access. The financial trail locked the forensic evidence into a rock-solid prosecutorial narrative. Detectives proved she did not just want control, she wanted his entire estate. The case file was finally complete, transforming a series of suspicious illnesses into a verified, inescapable trap. The year 1990 brought a suffocating tension to the packed Winston-Salem courtroom. Heavy oak doors swung shut, sealing Blanche Taylor Moore inside with the families of her victims. The prosecution immediately went on the offensive, projecting massive, undeniable forensic charts onto a white screen. They laid out the exact spikes in arsenic levels, mapping them flawlessly against Blanche's visitation logs. The chief medical examiner took the stand, speaking in crisp, unwavering clinical terms. He detailed the horrific degradation of the victim's nervous system, eliminating any possibility of natural illness. The scientific data dismantled every remaining shadow of a doubt. The jury stared at the undeniable mathematical proof of a slow, calculated execution. Blanche sat frozen at the defense table wearing a conservative floral dress and clutching a small Bible. She maintained an expression of confused innocence, playing the role of the targeted, grieving widow. However, the prosecution shattered this illusion by calling a forensic handwriting expert to the stand. The expert thoroughly dismantled the validity of the altered financial documents. The jury realized this kindly churchgoer had meticulously planned her financial windfall while her partner screamed in pain. Her absolute lack of empathy radiated through the silent room. The facade of the sweet Southern matriarch crumbled into dust. The meticulously constructed image of a selfless caregiver dissolved entirely. The defense strategy collapsed under the overwhelming weight of the chemical evidence. They possessed no alternate suspects, no environmental contamination, and no medical anomalies to hide behind. The jury retreated to the deliberation room, taking very little time to reach their conclusion. The foreman stood up, his voice echoing through the dead, silent chamber. He read out the highest possible charge, finding her completely responsible for the ultimate, permanent end of Reverend Reed. The gavel fell with a heavy metallic crack. The courtroom exhaled years of built-up grief and anxiety. The predator was finally stripped of her power and her freedom. The presiding judge delivered the absolute maximum penalty allowed by the state. Blanche Taylor Moore was remanded to the North Carolina Correctional Institution for Women, receiving the ultimate judicial sanction. She officially became the oldest female inmate, sitting on the state's highest security block. The victims' families finally obtained a measure of justice, though the deep scars of such profound betrayal permanently altered their lives. The local community struggled to reconcile their memories of the sweet organist with the monster she truly was. Furthermore, the case exposed terrifying blind spots within the medical community. The very institutions trusted to heal the sick had repeatedly failed to identify a serial poisoner operating right in their waiting rooms. This horrifying saga forced sweeping, mandatory changes in toxicological protocols across regional hospitals. Medical examiners implemented far more stringent, heavy metal screenings for patients presenting sudden, unexplained neurological distress. The glaring administrative loopholes that permitted a civilian to bring unchecked food into critical care units underwent immediate reform. Yet, the chilling legacy of this case endures as a stark warning. True darkness does not always hide in shadowy alleyways. Sometimes it serves dessert at the Sunday church picnic. Law enforcement learned that the guise of a smiling, devoted wife provides the perfect camouflage for immense cruelty. And as investigators would soon discover, this particular camouflage was being utilized in other parts of the country. Far away in the flat, dusty plains of Oklahoma, another seemingly cheerful woman was burying her husbands with alarming frequency. The life insurance checks kept clearing without issue. The sudden illnesses kept piling up in the local obituaries. The community kept offering their deepest, most sincere condolences to the grieving widow. She laughed softly, baked sweet treats, and maintained a perfectly constructed illusion of tragic misfortune. However, the invisible chemical trail she left behind was finally catching up to her. A vigilant local physician was about to examine a set of post-mortem symptoms that would stop him dead in his tracks. In the fading autumn light of October 1954, Samuel Doss lay in a hospital bed in Tulsa, Oklahoma, suffering from agonizing internal distress. His sudden departure from this world mirrored the abrupt fates of 4 men who came before him. The attending physician stood over the quiet body and stared at the official death certificate, refusing to sign his name to the document. The doctor demanded an immediate examination of the remains. This single act of medical defiance shattered a decades-long illusion of domestic warmth. Tulsa, Oklahoma, in the mid-1950s carried the quiet rhythm of a booming post-war city. Modest weatherboard houses lined the wide avenues, framed by wooden porches and the soft glow of sodium streetlights. Inside one of these pristine homes lived Nanny Doss, a woman who presented herself to the world as a cheerful and devoted wife. She spent her quiet afternoons sitting in a rocking chair, reading cheap romance magazines and dreaming of an idealized existence. Her neighbors knew her as a sweet grandmotherly figure who always offered a warm smile and a fresh cup of coffee. Beneath this constructed facade resided a mind fractured by a turbulent early life. She spent decades using Lonely Hearts columns to hunt for the perfect companion. She believed absolute domestic perfection was her right, no matter the human cost. The men who answered her newspaper advertisements were simple, hard-working individuals seeking a quiet companion for their twilight years. Samuel Doss was a strict but steady highway inspector who valued order and routine. Frank Harrelson, Arlie Lanning, and Richard Morton all shared similar hopes of finding comfort and loyalty after leading solitary lives. These men welcomed Nanny into their homes, trusting her sweet demeanor and her endless patience. They ate the meals she prepared, drank the coffee she brewed, and handed over their bank accounts without a second thought. None of them realized they were inviting an apex predator into their most vulnerable spaces. Their daily routines involved long shifts at work, followed by quiet evenings at the kitchen table. They sought genuine connection, but their desperate need for companionship ultimately sealed their tragic fates. The definitive turning point arrived in early October 1954. The Doss residence sat on a quiet corner, defined by a narrow hallway leading straight into a small, pristine kitchen. On a crisp evening, Samuel sat at his wooden dining table and consumed a large portion of prawn stew prepared by his doting wife. Hours later, a violent gastrointestinal illness seized his body, forcing an emergency admission to the local hospital. Medical staff spent several agonizing weeks treating his severe symptoms, assuming a severe digestive tract infection had taken hold. Against all odds, Samuel survived the initial affliction and received his formal discharge papers. He walked back through his front door, believing the worst ordeal of his life was finally over. He sat down at the very same kitchen table to enjoy a welcome home cup of coffee poured by Nanny. Within hours, the agonizing symptoms returned with a devastating finality, ending his life before the sun rose. The abrupt nature of his passing alarmed the medical professionals involved in his care. Dr. Wallace reviewed the medical chart and noticed stark inconsistencies between typical infections and the agonizing final hours Samuel endured. Rigid medical protocols of the 1950s usually dictated a swift signature for middle-aged men succumbing to internal organ failure. A tired or inattentive physician would normally attribute the passing to cardiac arrest and release the body to a local funeral home. Dr. Wallace refused to follow this path of least resistance. He contacted the county authorities and demanded a comprehensive toxicological analysis of the digestive organs. When informed of the impending examination, Nanny maintained a bright disposition, showing zero trace of natural grief. Her bizarre cheerfulness raised immediate alarms within the hospital corridors, prompting administrators to contact the Tulsa Police Department. The toxicological examination required meticulous chemical testing inside a poorly ventilated county laboratory. Forensic technicians removed the digestive tract and subjected the tissues to intensive chemical assays looking for heavy metals. The final results confirmed the presence of lethal amounts of arsenic lining the stomach walls. Armed with this undeniable physical evidence, Tulsa investigators drove straight to the weatherboard house and knocked on the freshly painted front door. They escorted the smiling widow to the downtown precinct, expecting a grueling process of denial and legal maneuvering. The interrogation room featured bare concrete walls, a heavy wooden table, and the thick scent of stale tobacco smoke. Two seasoned detectives sat across from the seemingly sweet grandmother, laying out the toxicological reports detailing the arsenic levels. They braced themselves for tears, but the woman across the table simply adjusted her glasses and offered a wide grin. Nanny admitted with a wide smile to lacing the prune stew and the evening coffee with large handfuls of toxic rat poison. As the detectives wrote down her statement, she began to laugh out loud, treating the interrogation like a casual social visit. She volunteered the names of 4 previous husbands who met the exact same sudden end. The investigators sat in stunned silence as the horrifying scope of her systematic deception unspooled across the wooden table. They realized a massive systemic failure allowed this woman to roam the country, unchecked for decades. Nanny utilized a glaring flaw in the jurisdictional borders of mid-century law enforcement. She moved from Alabama to North Carolina, then to Kansas, and finally to Oklahoma. Every time she crossed a state line, she erased her past, leaving the local authorities blind to her previous activities. Each previous passing fell under the jurisdiction of a different county coroner, governed by separate record-keeping systems. Without a centralized national database, isolated rural doctors attributed the sudden passing of older men to natural heart failure. No one questioned a grieving widow, and no cross-state communication ever triggered an alarm regarding her recurring tragedies. To build a solid legal foundation, Tulsa authorities faced the monumental bureaucratic nightmare of exhuming multiple remains across several states. Detectives spent endless hours typing up formal requests, fighting through interstate legal hurdles, and coordinating with distant rural sheriff departments. Warrants required signatures from out-of-state judges who possessed no prior knowledge of the Oklahoma investigation. The exhumation process demanded heavy labor, pulling rotting wooden caskets from damp earth in isolated country cemeteries. Soil samples had to be collected from around the graves to prove the arsenic did not seep into the caskets from the surrounding dirt. Once the caskets arrived at the respective state laboratories, forensic pathologists made a chilling discovery. The heavy application of arsenic mummified the internal organs of her previous husbands, preserving the evidence of her fatal acts. The chemical testing linked the remains of Frank Harrelson, Arlie Lanning, and Richard Morton to the exact same commercial rat poison used in Tulsa. The investigation expanded further when local authorities scrutinized the sudden losses of her extended family members. Detectives pored over dusty local archives, discovering that her own mother, her sister, and 2 of her young grandsons all perished under suspicious circumstances while in her care. The realization that she targeted vulnerable children shattered any remaining professional detachment the detectives maintained. The sheer volume of victims meant investigators had to compartmentalize the cases just to process the vast scale of the horror. They focused their primary legal strategy solely on the indisputable evidence gathered from the spouses to ensure a permanent conviction. The final pieces of the investigation locked into place. The interrogations continued without a single moment of genuine remorse from the suspect. The detectives demanded a logical reason for the immense suffering she caused. They searched for a financial motive hidden within complex life insurance policies. Nanny waved away their logical theories with a dismissive hand. She did not seek massive wealth or grand estates. She sought an imaginary ideal of romance that could never truly exist. When a husband failed to match the fantasy men in her magazines, she simply erased him from existence. The cheap rat poison served as her ultimate tool for a permanent marital reset. She believed absolute control over life and death was her personal right. The gentle mask of the sweet grandmother vanished entirely from the concrete room. Her giggles echoed down the silent precinct halls. She described the excruciating physical agony of her companions with chilling precision. The utter arrogance of her disposition terrified the hardened investigators sitting across the table. She hid her malice in plain sight for decades. She weaponized domestic tranquility to carry out her darkest impulses. The warm kitchen table became a lethal trap for unsuspecting men. The simple coffee cup became an instrument of ultimate doom. Law enforcement filized the vast array of charging documents. The long, silent reign of the giggling phantom came to a definitive end. In the year 1955, the legal proceedings commenced within a packed Oklahoma courtroom. Facing an insurmountable mountain of forensic evidence, Nani Doss pleaded guilty to the fatal act committed against Samuel Doss. She accepted this legal arrangement to avoid facing the ultimate penalty of the state. The presiding judge sentenced her to life imprisonment within the cold stone walls of the Oklahoma State Penitentiary. Her conviction brought a small measure of legal justice, but it could never erase the profound devastation inflicted upon the remaining families. Generations of relatives were left grappling with the horrifying truth that a trusted matriarch was actually a methodical predator. The systemic loopholes she exploited eventually prompted sweeping changes in cross-jurisdictional communication among regional medical examiners. Nanny never expressed a single moment of genuine remorse during her entire decade of incarceration. The convicted woman spent her final years confined to the Stark Hospital ward of the maximum security penitentiary. In the year 1965, she perished from leukemia, taking the full dark secrets of her other suspected victims to the grave. Her legacy remains a chilling reminder that the most dangerous threats often wear the most comforting and familiar faces. The terrifying reality is that predators do not always hide in shadowy alleyways or abandoned buildings. Sometimes they sit quietly in rocking chairs, reading magazines, and waiting for the perfect moment to strike from within the safety of a family home. The devastation left in her wake forever changed the way investigators approach sudden tragedies within domestic spaces. From a seemingly sweet grandmother hiding behind the pristine domesticity of the 1950s, we turn our attention to a modern, deeply disturbing tale. We must now examine a mother whose missing children sparked a frantic, nationwide manhunt and unraveled a terrifying trail of sudden, inexplicable tragedies. It is late November 2019. The cold Idaho wind sweeps across the quiet suburban streets of Rexburg. Police officers step onto the frozen porch of a modest town home to perform a routine welfare check. They are looking for 7-year-old Joshua Jackson Vallow, a boy with special needs whose extended family has not heard from him in weeks. The door opens to reveal his mother, Lori Vallow. She offers a calm smile and a perfectly rehearsed lie about her son visiting a friend in another state. The officers take her statement and leave the property completely unaware of the darkness hiding behind that closed door. By the time investigators return the following morning with a search warrant, the town home is completely abandoned. Lori and her new husband, Chad Daybell, have already boarded a flight to Hawaii, leaving behind a chilling void and 2 missing children. Years before the quiet town of Rexburg became the center of a nationwide nightmare, Lori Vallow projected the image of a deeply devoted mother. She lived under the warm, relentless sun of Chandler, Arizona, surrounded by manicured lawns and towering palm trees. Neighbors saw a charming, attractive woman who dedicated her time to her 16-year-old daughter, Tylee Ryan, and her adopted son, JJ. She seemed to possess endless patience for JJ, who required strict routines and specialized care for his autism. Tylee was a fiercely independent teenager with a bright smile, protective of her younger brother and deeply connected to her family. Charles Vallow, Lori's 4th husband, provided a comfortable life through his successful business ventures. They attended church services regularly, portraying the perfect portrait of American suburban success behind the polished veneer. However, a profound and terrifying ideological shift was taking root 800 miles away in the rural, frost-bitten landscape of Idaho. Chad Daybell lived a drastically different life. He operated a small independent publishing company from his home, churning out dozens of fringe religious fiction books. His writing focused heavily on apocalyptic prophecies, extreme survivalism, and strict preparations for the end of the world. Tammy Daybell, his quiet and incredibly hard-working wife, served as a public school librarian and managed the household finances. She supported his literary ambitions for nearly 30 years, raising their 5 children while he immersed himself in radical Doomsday theology. Chad began traveling to specialized conferences across the western United States to promote his extreme ideologies. At one of these specific gatherings in late 2018, the author crossed paths with Lori Vallow. This single meeting sparked a profound obsession that would ultimately lay the groundwork for a massive multi-state tragedy. The first undeniable fracture in the Vallow household occurred in January 2019. Charles Vallow returned home from a business trip to find his house locked and his keys entirely useless. Lori had canceled his flight home, emptied their joint bank accounts, and taken his truck. Charles drove directly to the local police department in Gilbert, Arizona, begging the officers for immediate intervention. He pleaded with the desk sergeant, stating clearly that his wife had lost her mind and believed she was a reincarnated deity. Charles explicitly warned law enforcement that Lori had threatened his life and that she viewed him as a dark spirit. The authorities dismissed his desperate pleas as a standard domestic dispute, advising him to handle it through civil court. This catastrophic systemic failure allowed a highly unstable individual to maintain absolute control over 2 vulnerable dependents. 6 months later, the tragic consequences of that ignored warning materialized in brutal fashion. On a sweltering morning in July 2019, Charles arrived at a home in Chandler, Arizona, to pick up his son. A violent confrontation ensued inside the residence, ending when Lori's brother, Alex Cox, fired 2 lethal shots into Charles's chest. Alex immediately claimed self-defense, telling the responding detectives that Charles had attacked him with a baseball bat. Investigators took photographs of a minor scrape on the back of Alex's head and listened to Lori's calm, emotionless testimony. The Arizona detectives inexplicably allowed Alex to walk free that same afternoon without filing a single charge. No one pressed Lori on why she ordered a pool party for her children just minutes after the fatal encounter. With Charles permanently removed and a massive life insurance payout anticipated, Lori uprooted JJ and Tyler and drove them straight to Rexburg, Idaho. The relocation to Rexburg marked the beginning of a highly calculated and deeply concealed operation. Lori rented a unit in a newly constructed townhome complex, placing her geographically within a short drive of Chad Daybell's residence. The physical layout of Rexburg isolated the children from their extended family members in Arizona and Louisiana. During the first few weeks of September 2019, Tyle was last seen at the entrance of Yellowstone National Park. A tourist camera captured a fleeting image of the teenager smiling next to her uncle, Alex Cox. Days later, little JJ attended a local elementary school for the final time before his mother formally withdrew him. Lori informed the school administrators that she planned to homeschool the boy due to his complex behavioral needs. The children simply vanished from the public eye, leaving no trace of their whereabouts. While the children remained missing, another sudden tragedy struck the quiet Idaho community. In October 2019, Tammy Daybell, a seemingly healthy 49-year-old woman, passed away in her sleep. Chad Daybell declined an autopsy, telling the local coroner that his wife had suffered from a sudden coughing fit and a weak heart. The local county authorities accepted this explanation without conducting any strict toxicological screens or extensive internal examinations. This glaring procedural oversight allowed Chad to bury his wife just 3 days later with zero legal friction. Less than 3 weeks after the funeral, Chad and Lori flew to a sunny beach in Hawaii to celebrate their wedding. They exchanged vows while smiling for photographs, wearing traditional floral leis and matching rings purchased weeks before Tammy even died. Back on the mainland, concerned grandparents repeatedly dialed the Rexburg police, demanding answers about JJ and Tyler. The pressure from the extended family finally forced the authorities to execute the initial welfare check in late November. When investigators discovered the empty town home, they immediately escalated the situation to a multi-agency task force involving the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Federal agents obtained sweeping search warrants for the digital footprints of Lori, Chad, and Alex Cox. They mapped the precise global positioning system coordinates attached to Alex's cellular device from the previous September. The data analysts faced a monumental challenge, sifting through thousands of encrypted messages and location pings. The technical reconstruction revealed a terrifying pattern of movement between Lori's town home and Chad Daybell's rural property. Law enforcement officers secured court orders to intercept the couple's private electronic communications, hoping to locate the children alive. Instead, they uncovered a disturbing dialogue where Lori and Chad discussed individuals in their lives as spiritual obstacles that needed literal removal. The intercepted messages revealed a rigid, terrifying belief system shared between the newlywed couple. They assigned specific numbers and darkness levels to their friends and family members, labeling those who questioned them as soulless shells. Detectives realized that Charles Vallow, Tammy Daybell, and both missing children had all been classified with these severe spiritual designations shortly before their respective ends. To build a solid criminal case, the task force needed physical evidence to contradict the web of natural deaths and self-defense claims. In December 2019, investigators secured the legal authority to exhume the body of Tammy Daybell from a Utah cemetery. A comprehensive forensic examination conclusively proved that the librarian did not pass away from natural cardiac failure. The medical examiner determined her true cause of passing was intentional asphyxiation at the hands of another person. The authorities now had undeniable proof of a conspiracy, but the primary question regarding the children remained unanswered. Law enforcement focused their entire strategy on the precise cellular data extracted from the brothers' mobile phone. The digital map placed Alex Cox in the exact center of Chad Daybell's backyard on the mornings following the last known sightings of Tyle and JJ. Detectives pored over satellite imagery of the Daybell property, noting the locations of an old fire pit and a small pet cemetery near the edge of the lot. The property spanned several acres characterized by overgrown grass, large storage sheds, and a line of thick trees shielding the backyard from the main road. The agents needed overwhelming probable cause to bring heavy excavation equipment onto a private citizen's land. They compiled the financial records, the altered life insurance policies, the exhumation results, and the geographical data into a massive, undeniable affidavit. A local judge reviewed the extensive documentation and swiftly granted the comprehensive search warrant for the Idaho property. The tactical teams read their ground-penetrating radar equipment, preparing for the grim task ahead. On the morning of June 9, 2020, a convoy of federal agents and local deputies descended upon Chad Daybell's property. The humid summer air hung heavy as investigators set up a strict perimeter around the rural home. Technicians guided ground-penetrating radar machines across the specific coordinates provided by the cellular tracking data. The first area of interest sat directly near the old stone-lined fire pit at the edge of the yard. Agents grabbed shovels and began removing the topsoil, peeling back layers of earth and ash. The metallic clink of a spade striking something solid shattered the morning silence. They uncovered melted plastic, charred organic material, and eventually, a horrifying truth hidden beneath the dirt. The remains of 16-year-old Tylee Ryan rested in a shallow, unceremonious grave. The excavation team moved to the second set of coordinates located mere yards away beneath the shade of a large tree. They measured the distance carefully, noting how close this spot was to the wooden fence line and a decorative pet cemetery. The agents dug through the soft manicured grass until they struck a series of large flat rocks. Beneath the heavy stones, they found thick layers of wooden paneling protecting a tightly bound bundle of black plastic. The investigators peeled back the heavy tape to reveal the small frame of 7-year-old JJ Vallow. He was dressed in his red pajamas, his life stolen by the very people tasked with protecting him. The grim unearthing proved that the couple's radical religious ideology was simply a lethal mechanism. They utilized apocalyptic prophecies as a shield to eliminate multiple family members for financial gain and uninhibited romance. The judicial system moved with relentless precision to hold the perpetrators accountable for their staggering crimes. In 2023, Lori Vallow Daybell stood before a judge in an Idaho courtroom, offering no apologies for the destruction she caused. A jury found her guilty of the premeditated killings of JJ and Tyle, as well as conspiracy in the demise of Tammy Daybell. The judge delivered a blistering statement, sentencing the former mother to multiple consecutive life sentences without the absolute possibility of parole. She was removed from the courtroom in handcuffs, permanently exiled to a maximum security state penitentiary. The families of Charles Vallow and Tammy Daybell wept in the gallery, finding a small measure of peace in the definitive verdict. The system that originally failed Charles in Arizona finally delivered a permanent measure of justice in Idaho. The surviving relatives vowed to honor the bright, unfulfilled potential of the victims. Chad Daybell faced his own severe reckoning a year later in the spring of 2024. Prosecutors dismantled his facade of being an innocent religious author, painting him as the central architect of the lethal conspiracy. A separate jury convicted him on all identical charges, recognizing his undeniable role in the dark, calculated plot because of the sheer magnitude and cruel nature of the crimes. The presiding judge sentenced the author to the maximum penalty of death. The properties were sold, the books were pulled from circulation, and the community of Rexburg slowly began the painful process of healing. The beautiful memories of Tylee, JJ, Charles, and Tammy outlasted the twisted delusions of the individuals who betrayed them. However, terrifying betrayals by a maternal figure are not consigned to the vast landscapes of the American West. Decades earlier, a hospital in Alabama witnessed a similar sinister deception unfold when another mother decided to secretly poison her own bloodline. In 1979, deep inside the sterile humming corridors of an Alabama hospital, 19-year-old Care Hall Hilly lies immobilized in a hospital bed, her nervous system shutting down from a mystery illness. Her extremities are numb, her hair falls out in handfuls, and she is gripped by intense waves of nausea that baffle her physicians. These exact physical markers mirror the precise terminal decline that claimed her father 4 years earlier. Desperate doctors run a heavy metals toxicity panel seeking any logical explanation for her deteriorating state. The lab results reveal astronomical, lethal levels of arsenic coursing through her veins. Carol is not suffering from a rare genetic condition, but rather someone is feeding her poison. The primary suspect pacing the linoleum floor of the waiting room is her own mother, Audrey Marie Hilly, before the sterile hospital rooms and the flashing lights of police cruisers. Audrey Marie Hilly presented the perfect picture of Southern middle-class respectability. Anniston, Alabama, in the 1960s and 1970s, was a quiet, industrial hub nestled in the foothills of the Appalachian Mountains. Neat rows of brick homes lined shaded suburban streets, where neighbors knew each other by name and attended the same Sunday church services. Mari fit into this community fabric as a polite, well-dressed administrative assistant. She kept a pristine home, her lawn manicured, her domestic life projecting an aura of quiet stability. Her husband, Frank Hilly, worked hard to provide for his family. A dependable man who valued his community and adored his children. To the outside observer, the Hilly family embodied the standard American dream, insulated from the chaos of the larger world. Neighbors saw Marie as a devoted mother, always ready with a polite smile and a wave from her porch. Yet behind the heavy wooden front door of the Hilly residence, the atmosphere was suffocating, dictated by Marie's hidden spending habits and secret debts. She maintained a facade of affluence while draining the family finances, laying the groundwork for a calculated betrayal. In May of 1975, the constructed illusion began to fracture when Frank Hilly suddenly fell ill. The Hilly house stood just a few miles from the local medical clinic, a short drive that Frank would make repeatedly as his health inexplicably vanished. He experienced severe abdominal pain, persistent nausea, and a profound weakness that left him unable to stand. Local physicians examining his jaundiced skin and failing liver function diagnosed him with viral hepatitis. They lacked the diagnostic foresight to look past the common ailments of the era, missing the insidious nature of his decline. Frank spent his final weeks confined to a hospital bed, his body agonizingly shutting down while his wife stood vigil by his side. Marai played the role of the grieving, terrified spouse with chilling perfection, receiving sympathy and casseroles from her unsuspecting neighbors. On May 25, 1975, Frank took his last breath, leaving his community in mourning and his children without a father. The true cause of his agonizing demise remained hidden deep within his tissues, buried beneath a hastily signed death certificate. Marie walked away from the cemetery with a staggering life insurance payout, her secret secure within the unquestioning system of the time. 4 years after burying her husband, the life insurance money dried up, and Marie cast her predatory gaze upon her teenage daughter. In the late summer months of 1979, Carol Hilly began experiencing the exact terrifying symptoms that had destroyed her father. The physical geography of the home shifted into a chamber of torment, with Carol confined to her bedroom at the end of the hall. She endured relentless bouts of nausea, crippling muscle weakness, and a terrifying numbness creeping up her limbs. Marie diligently prepared her daughter's meals, bringing trays of food and medication directly to the bedside, playing the concerned caregiver. Every bowl of soup and every glass of water contained measured, deliberate doses of arsenic, calibrated to prolong the suffering while avoiding immediate detection. Carol trusted the hands that fed her, unaware that her mother was orchestrating her physical destruction for another insurance payout. The teenager's condition deteriorated so severely that she was transferred to the hospital, her future hanging by a thread. The medical staff initially struggled to identify the root cause until a keen-eyed toxicologist noted the distinct lines on Carol's fingernails, a classic marker of heavy metal exposure. This single medical observation shattered the facade Marie had maintained for years. Doctors ordered comprehensive toxicology tests confirming that Carol was loaded with lethal concentrations of arsenic. The hospital staff alerted local law enforcement, initiating a quiet, urgent investigation into the Hilly household. Detectives secured a warrant and searched the family residence, discovering a small, undeniable vial of arsenic hidden among Mary's personal belongings. The pieces of the puzzle snapped into place, prompting the district attorney to file for an emergency exhumation of Frank Hilly's remains. In early October of 1979, heavy machinery broke the quiet earth of the local cemetery, pulling Frank's casket back into the harsh light of day. Forensic pathologists conducted a thorough examination of his preserved tissues, utilizing advanced chemical analysis unavailable during his initial hospital stay. The results were conclusive and horrifying, showing massive accumulations of arsenic within his remains. The medical examiner revised Frank's cause of death, transforming a tragic illness into a verified, calculated poisoning. Marie was arrested and booked into the county jail, her polite mask ripped away to reveal the cold predator beneath. The criminal justice system in 1979 possessed massive, glaring blind spots regarding the flight risk of seemingly ordinary middle-class women. Despite the overwhelming physical evidence of a methodical, multi-year poisoning campaign, a local judge granted Marie Hilly bail. The court set her bond at a remarkably low figure, treating her like a white-collar offender rather than a lethal threat to her own family. Her defense attorneys utilized her clean prior record and community standing to paint her as a harmless widow facing circumstantial accusations. On November 18, 1979, Marie walked out of the Calhoun County Jail, signed a simple piece of paper, and vanished into the American highway system. The local police department lacked the digital databases and interconnected tracking networks that modern law enforcement relies upon today. Detectives arrived at her Anniston home days later for a routine check, only to find the house abandoned and the driveway empty. Investigators issued local alerts, but the primitive communication methods of the era severely limited their reach. She exploited a massive jurisdictional loophole, knowing that once she crossed state lines, the local Alabama warrants would struggle to keep pace. The investigation hit an agonizing dead end as local tips proved useless, leaving Carl to recover alone while her tormentor roamed free. While Alabama detectives sifted through fabricated tips, Marie traveled hundreds of miles north, reinventing her existence. She arrived in New England and fabricated a fresh identity, calling herself Robbie Han, a woman with no past and no ties. She altered her appearance, changing her hair and her wardrobe to blend into the quiet, snowy streets of the Northeast. In early 1980, she established a rigid daily routine, eventually crossing paths with a man named John Homan. John was a quiet, trusting individual who saw Robbie as a charming, vibrant companion, oblivious to the lethal history trailing behind her. They moved together to a modest house in New Hampshire, establishing a domestic life built on a foundation of absolute lies. The physical distance between the humid towns of Alabama and the freezing winters of New England provided the perfect geographic shield. Marie learned the local transit routes, established new grocery habits, and memorized her fabricated background to avoid any verbal slip-ups. Law enforcement back down south remained in the dark, their physical paper bulletins failing to reach the local precincts of New Hampshire. Detectives in Alabama focused their limited resources on local bus terminals, missing the fact that their target was settling into a new marriage across the country. Marie upheld this quiet existence until late 1982, when she initiated a bizarre plan to discard her current identity while maintaining her psychological hold over her unsuspecting husband. She convinced John to relocate the couple to Texas, citing a desire for warmer weather and new business opportunities. They established a new residence in the sprawling, sun-baked suburbs. But Marie soon implemented her psychological vanishing act. Marie told John she needed to travel out of state for urgent medical treatments, packing her bags and leaving the Texas home. Weeks later, John received a devastating phone call from a woman claiming to be Robbie's twin sister, Terry Martin. The voice on the line informed him that his beloved wife Robbie had passed away from a rare fast-acting illness in a Florida clinic. John mourned the loss, deeply unaware that the grave he was crying over did not exist and the disease was a total fiction. Marie ended the life of her alter ego without utilizing a single drop of real poison. Back in Alabama, investigators continued performing routine background checks on Marie's former associates blind to the psychological torture occurring in Texas. The audacity of her deception reached its peak when Marie decided to return and manipulate John Homan's trusting nature. Posing as the fictitious twin sister Terry, she traveled back to Texas to allegedly collect her deceased sister's belongings and comfort the grieving widower. She altered her makeup, changed her hair color again, and adjusted her vocal cadence to sell the illusion of being a different woman. She walked right back into the exact same house she had lived in as Robbie, navigating the hallways and rooms with a chilling familiarity. John, overwhelmed by intense grief and vulnerability, accepted Terry into his home, finding strange comfort in her striking physical resemblance to his lost wife. Marie integrated herself back into the domestic routine, ruthlessly exploiting the bizarre psychological dynamic she had just engineered. She even returned with John to his home state of New Hampshire, transitioning the lie across multiple state lines once more. The systemic disconnect between state registries allowed her to exist as a ghost. There were no death certificates for Robbie, and no birth certificates for Terry. The predator duplicated herself, proving that her manipulation extended far beyond the physical realm into deep psychological territory. The complexity of maintaining multiple fabricated identities eventually caused the constructed facade to splinter under local scrutiny. By early 1983, Marie secured an administrative job at a local manufacturing firm in Brattleboro, Vermont, operating under the Terry Martin alias. The geographic layout of Brattleboro, a tight-knit community nestled along the Connecticut River, meant that erratic behavior rarely went unnoticed by observant locals. Marie's co-workers began documenting strange inconsistencies in her daily stories, noting her bizarre comments and an unusual fixation on her supposed sister's death. She submitted a suspicious obituary for Robbie to the local newspaper, detailing an unverified medical facility and a non-existent physician in Texas. A sharp-eyed local reporter attempted to verify the specific details for a follow-up story, only to discover that the Florida hospital where Robbie allegedly died had never heard of her. The reporter contacted the local Vermont police, passing along the glaring discrepancies and raising serious alarms about the new woman in town. Investigators began pulling local administrative records, discovering that there was no official paper trail for a Terry Martin. The tangled web of interstate deception was catching the attention of seasoned detectives who systematically refused to ignore the red flags. The chronological end of Marie's fugitive run arrived with sudden bureaucratic precision inside a quiet Vermont police station. State police investigators, armed with the undeniable inconsistencies surrounding the fake obituary, ordered Terry Martin to the station for formal questioning. The interrogation room was small and uncomfortably bright, a stark physical contrast to the shadowy deception she had operated within for years. Detectives pressed her on the exact medical details of her sister's passing, demanding direct contact information for the attending physicians and the funeral home. Marie sat rigidly in the metal chair, her usual charm failing as she spun increasingly contradictory tales to cover her tracks. The investigators formally requested her identification and fingerprints, a standard administrative procedure that broke the illusion she had spent 3 years building. Recognizing that her physical fingerprints would instantly connect her to the National Crime Information Center database, she realized her massive charade was collapsing. The investigators processed her prints, waiting in the tense, silent room for the national system to deliver the cold, hard facts. The teletype machine clattered to life, spitting out a staggering law enforcement match that left the Vermont detectives stunned. The woman sitting across from them was not a grieving twin sister named Terry, nor was she a deceased wife named Robbie. The ink on the paper confirmed she was Audrey Marie Hilley, a sought fugitive actively wanted in Alabama for the lethal poisoning of her family. The horrifying realization settled over the room. The polite, well-dressed woman before them was a methodical predator hiding in plain sight. John Homan was summoned to the station, where detectives gently explained that the woman he married, mourned, and then welcomed back was entirely a phantom. The psychological devastation inflicted upon him was absolute, as he learned he had shared his most intimate spaces with a woman who viewed human beings as disposable assets. Law enforcement placed Marie under heavy guard in a secure cell, ensuring no local magistrate could grant her another absurdly low bail. The massive cross-country hunt had concluded, stripping away her multiple masks to reveal the calculating, remorseless individual underneath. Audrey Marie Hilley was shackled and extradited back to the courtrooms of Calhoun County, Alabama, forced to face the devastation she left behind. During the publicized trial, prosecutors laid out the irrefutable forensic evidence, detailing the astronomical levels of heavy metals physically extracted from her victims. The jury saw past her polite courtroom demeanor, recognizing the terrifying reality of her calculated betrayals. She was convicted of intentionally causing Frank's death and for the agonizing attempted poisoning of Carol, receiving a life sentence plus an additional 20 years. However, the Alabama penal system introduced one final, infuriating administrative loophole into the timeline of this case. In 1987, despite her proven history as an extreme flight risk and a master of disguise, a rigid prison policy granted her a 3-day weekend furlough. She was permitted to leave the secure correctional facility, a catastrophic systemic failure that ignored the extreme severity of her crimes. Unsurprisingly, Marie failed to return to the facility on Sunday evening, initiating one last attempt to evade the consequences of her actions. Her final escape attempt lacked the careful planning and geographical distance of her previous cross-country vanishing acts. 4 days after walking away from her absurd furlough, Marie was found delirious, crawling near the wooden porch of a rural Anniston home. The dense Alabama woods and plummeting late winter temperatures had stripped away her physical resilience, subjecting her to severe hypothermia and extreme environmental exposure. Emergency responders transported her back to the very same local hospital where her daughter had once fought for her life against her mother's poison. Within hours, Audrey Marie Hilley succumbed to the freezing elements, a quiet, permanent end to a life defined by ruthless manipulation and greed. The local community and her surviving victims finally experienced the definitive closure that the justice system had repeatedly jeopardized through poor administrative oversight. But while Marie utilized silent heavy metals to covertly eliminate those closest to her, other predators relied on brutal physical force in distant corners of the globe. This grim reality leads us directly into a hotel room in Lima, Peru, where a highly publicized vanishing would echo into a completely new, devastating tragedy. On the morning of May 30, 2010, a housekeeper in Lima, Peru, turned a heavy brass key and pushed open the wooden door of room 309. Inside, the quiet hum of the street traffic outside faded against a grim, permanent stillness resting over the room. A 21-year-old business student named Stephanie Flores lay lifeless on the floor, having met a brutal, unprovoked end. A quick check of the hotel registry revealed a chilling name listed on the guest log. The room belonged to Joran van der Sot. Exactly 5 years to the day had passed since another young woman vanished into the tropical night alongside that exact same man. Stephanie Flores lived a vibrant life in the affluent, bustling Miraflores district of Lima. She was 21 years old, studying business administration, and carried a natural warmth that drew friends to her side. The streets of Miraflores overlooked the dark waters of the Pacific Ocean, lined with modern glass buildings, upscale cafes, and popular entertainment venues. Stephanie spent her evenings navigating this safe, familiar neighborhood, often joining her friends for social outings in well-lit, crowded spaces. She possessed a deep trust in the people around her, viewing the world through an optimistic lens. Her family adored her, recognizing her sharp mind and ambitious plans for the future. She had no reason to suspect that her trusting nature would intersect with a wandering predator. Steffi operated completely outside the realm of global true crime news, unaware of the dark shadows lurking in international waters. Thousands of miles away, an arrogant young man had spent the previous 5 years evading the heavy hand of justice. Joran van der Sot carried an infamous reputation stemming from the high-profile disappearance of Nasiedi Holloway in the year 2005. During a high school graduation trip to the small Caribbean island of Aruba, Naledi stepped into a car with Joran and 2 of his friends, never to be seen again. Aruban authorities held Joran multiple times but ultimately released him, citing a rigid legal threshold that required physical evidence they failed to secure. This jurisdictional failure created a massive loophole, allowing a dangerous individual to walk free without facing a jury. Joran weaponized his newfound infamy, manipulating media outlets and boasting about his evasion of international law enforcement. He traveled across borders, funded by sympathetic benefactors and exploiting his dark celebrity status. The failure of the Aruban justice system stripped Nadrili of her future and emboldened her primary suspect. Joran believed he possessed a brilliant, untouchable mind, feeling far superior to the detectives trailing his every move. In late May of 2010, Joran arrived in Lima, searching for new environments to fund his gambling habits. He checked into a modest brick hotel situated just a few blocks from the glittering lights of the Atlantic City Casino. The casino floor hummed with the mechanical chimes of slot machines and the quiet shuffling of heavy card decks. Stephanie Flores sat at a poker table in this exact casino, focusing on her cards under the bright recessed ceiling lights. Joran noticed her sitting alone, masking his predatory intentions behind an easy, charismatic smile. He introduced himself, projecting the false image of an ordinary, charming tourist enjoying the local nightlife. Stephanie engaged in light conversation, treating him like any other foreign visitor. She allowed him into her social orbit, entirely unaware of the lethal history attached to his name. The trap was set, hidden beneath the polite exchanges of a late-night card game. On May 30, the 2 young adults left the crowded casino floor and walked the short concrete distance back to the hotel. Hotel security cameras mounted in the narrow, dimly lit hallway captured their final moments together. The grainy footage showed Joran unlocking the heavy wooden door of room 309, ushering Stephanie inside. The heavy door clicked shut, cutting off all external views into the cramped space. Inside that room, Stephanie realized too late the horrifying reality of the man standing between her and the exit. A fatal physical assault occurred, silencing her bright future and leaving her lifeless on the carpeted floor. Hours later, the security camera recorded the door opening once again. Joran emerged alone, carrying his belongings in a dark duffel bag, his demeanor calm and unbothered. He walked out of the hotel lobby, disappearing into the chaotic morning traffic of Lima. Housekeeping staff knocked on the door of room 309. The following morning, receiving only a heavy, lingering silence in response. They pushed the door open, making a grim discovery that shattered the quiet routine of the building. Peruvian National Police officers flooded the scene, taping off the narrow hallway and beginning a meticulous collection of forensic evidence. Fingerprints lifted from the room and the official guest registry pointed to a single globally recognized suspect. Investigators realized they were tracking a man who had already mastered the art of slipping through jurisdictional cracks. Joran had not stayed in the city. He chartered private transport heading deep into the southern desert regions. He crossed the border into Chile, using falsified documentation to evade international checkpoints. Interpol issued an urgent red notice, mobilizing border agents across multiple South American nations. The race to capture an arrogant fugitive had officially begun, fueled by a devastating sense of international urgency. While Peruvian authorities scrambled to track Joran across the harsh Chilean border, a parallel investigation was actively unfolding back in the United States. Weeks prior to his trip to Lima, Joran initiated a cruel, calculated psychological attack against Nadele Holloway's grieving mother. He reached out to a legal representative connected to the family, offering an agonizing trade. He demanded a payment of $250,000 in exchange for the exact geographical coordinates of Nassie's remains in Aruba. This monstrous proposal demonstrated his profound lack of empathy, treating a mother's endless torment as a simple financial transaction. The Federal Bureau of Investigation stepped in, recognizing a rare opportunity to trap an elusive predator. Federal agents orchestrated a highly classified sting operation, ranging an initial wire transfer of $15,000 and a cash handoff of $10,000. They meticulously recorded his false promises, documenting every keystroke and spoken word for a future federal indictment. Joran collected the initial $25,000 from the federal sting and severed all contact with the Holloway family. He provided a fabricated, useless location in Aruba, knowing the resulting search would yield nothing. The immense tragedy lay in the fact that Joran used these exact extorted funds to purchase his plane ticket to South America. The money meant to bring a missing daughter home instead financed a trip that ended the life of Stephanie Flores. Detectives in the United States worked frantically to secure a federal arrest warrant for wire fraud and extortion. They navigated rigid bureaucratic protocols, drafting lengthy affidavits required to authorize an international arrest. The paperwork delay, though legally necessary, created a devastating window of opportunity for the unbothered fugitive. While federal prosecutors finalized their documents, Joran was already sitting at the poker table in Lima, selecting his next target. Down in South America, Chilean authorities received the International Red Notice and began scouring their national transit records. Investigators mapped out his potential routes, calculating the exact distance between the Peruvian border crossing and the bustling capital city of Santiago. They knew Joran thrived in populated environments, using crowded urban spaces to blend in and vanish. Detectives mobilized specialized tracking units, analyzing recent credit card swipes and local hotel registrations. They systematically eliminated entire neighborhoods, relying on sharp police intuition and raw legwork to narrow the grid. The Chilean police understood the massive international pressure resting on their shoulders, refusing to repeat the investigative blunders of the Aruban forces. They monitored highways, bus terminals, and taxi dispatch logs, searching for a tall foreign national matching his exact description. Every passing hour increased the risk of Joran slipping onto a transatlantic flight. Escaping into a country with no extradition treaty would mean losing him forever. The breakthrough arrived when a sharp-eyed taxi driver recognized the face dominating the local television broadcasts. The driver directed authorities to a specific route leading toward the coastal city of Vina del Mar. Chilean detectives descended upon a local highway, identifying a vehicle carrying the arrogant fugitive. They initiated a sudden, overwhelming traffic stop, boxing in the car and dragging Joran out onto the asphalt. He offered no resistance, his previous confident smirk replaced by a sudden, stark realization of his capture. Officers placed him in heavy iron cuffs, securing him in the back of a reinforced transport van. The sheer distance he had traveled meant nothing against the coordinated efforts of a relentless investigative team. He sat in a foreign holding cell stripped of his international mobility and his twisted sense of superiority. Chilean officials wasted no time navigating the complex extradition protocols, prioritizing swift justice over bureaucratic delays. They physically escorted Joran to the border crossing, handing him over to heavily armed Peruvian authorities waiting on the other side. Peruvian detectives placed him in a secure interrogation room, presenting him with undeniable forensic evidence recovered from room 309. They laid out the hotel's security footage, the timeline of his departure, and the physical remnants of the violent struggle. Faced with an inescapable reality, Joran finally broke his silence and offered a full confession to the fatal assault. He attempted to frame his actions as a sudden, impulsive rage triggered by Stephanie looking at his laptop, blaming the victim to the very end. The detectives saw right through his manipulative narrative, recognizing the calculated, predatory nature of his actions. He was formally charged, firmly locked within a judicial system that refused to entertain his endless legal games. The heavy iron doors of a Peruvian maximum security prison finally slammed shut. Joran van der Sloot sat isolated in a cold concrete cell. The blinding arrogance that fueled his 5-year global tour evaporated into the damp air. He had spent years treating the world as his personal playground. He viewed international laws as mere suggestions. He believed his intellect far surpassed every detective and every grieving family member. Now, the walls closed in tight, the dual investigations from the United States and Peru collided with devastating force. The horrifying truth of the situation crystallized for the entire world to see. There was no loophole left to exploit. There was no missing physical evidence to hide behind. The security cameras captured his every move. The forensic investigators locked down the grim scene. The extradition papers carried absolute authority. Joran could not manipulate a jury from behind reinforced steel bars. His pattern of pathological lying met a rigid, unyielding wall of solid evidence. The facade of an ordinary charming tourist shattered completely. The monster hiding in plain sight was dragged into the harsh light of justice. Stephanie Flores lost her future, but her tragic end ultimately stopped a serial predator from roaming the earth. The Peruvian justice system operated with commendable efficiency, refusing to grant Joran any leniency or endless appeals. In the year 2012, a panel of judges convicted him of the fatal assault and robbery of Stephanie Flores. The court handed down a severe sentence of 28 years in a harsh, remote prison facility. The judges explicitly condemned his cruel actions, ensuring he would spend his youth and middle age locked away from society. The Flores family faced an unimaginable void, but they found a small measure of solace in his permanent removal from the streets. They watched the arrogant fugitive trade his casino chips for a sterile, unforgiving concrete box. His status as a notorious celebrity meant absolutely nothing inside the brutal walls of the South American penal system. He was reduced to a mere inmate number, stripped of his voice and his freedom. Over a decade later, the wheels of American justice finally caught up to the isolated prisoner. In the year 2023, Peruvian authorities temporarily extradited Joran to the United States to face the outstanding federal charges. He stood before a federal judge in Alabama, answering for the cruel extortion plot he enacted against Nalé Holloway's mother. In a stunning courtroom moment, he pleaded guilty to wire fraud and extortion, formally admitting his actions on the federal record. More importantly, he provided a detailed confession regarding the ultimate fate of Nalé Holloway, confirming he ended her life on that dark Aruban beach in the year 2005. After receiving a 20-year federal sentence to run concurrently with his Peruvian time, he was flown back to South America to finish his primary sentence. The families of both victims fought through international bureaucracy, ignored red flags, and profound legal failures to ensure this predator would never harm another trusting soul. The saga of Joran van der Sloot stands as one of the darkest chapters in modern criminal history. His permanent incarceration closes a deeply unsettling loop of international evasion, paving the way for our final thoughts on these connected tragedies. These 10 cases demonstrate the chilling reality that the most dangerous threats often lie sleeping in the very same bed, masked by forged smiles and fraudulent grief. We conclude by honoring the victims whose tragic links finally broke these chains of deception. Thank you for watching. Please remain vigilant and click the video on your screen for our next investigative documentary. These 10 cases reveal the reality that dangerous threats lie sleeping in the same bed. Predators use masks of forged smiles and fraudulent grief to hide their intent. We conclude by honoring the victims whose tragic links broke these chains of deception. What stories remain hidden behind a partner's smile? Thank you for watching. Select the next investigative documentary on your screen.